Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to the channel. About a month ago, I made a few videos on an individual by the name of Audra Winter. This is a book talk indie author situation that has taken the world by storm. It has gotten to the point where I am seeing YouTubers who don't make content surrounding books specifically, making content talking about this situation. The spark notes of the situation is that Audra Winter is an indie author who had a book release come out and the book was not met to the best reviews. If this is the first you're being introduced to this, what is your screen time? And how do I become more like you? But in all seriousness, if this is the first that you're hearing of this situation, you might be wondering, how on earth could a poorly met book release have risen to the level? I'm going to summarize my first two videos the best that I can here up front, but they do reach a sum total of over 3 hours. So obviously I'm not going to be able to capture all of the nuances in my quick summary here. Audra is a book talker who had built her platform back in 2021 off of an idea that she had for a book. It was a fantasy based around magic associated with the zodiac signs. No, it's not the Zodiac Academy. One of the ladies at my hair place asked me that today. She had signed with an agent back then and everything seemed to be going great until one day she disappeared off the internet. She returned back once to post a random video about tattoos, but otherwise didn't post again until November of 2024, where she returned to inform everybody that she was finally going to be publishing the book that was the final version of the idea that had made her such a hit on Book Talk to begin with, the book that everybody had been waiting years for at that point, The Age of Scorpius. She announced that she would be self-publishing it and that she was no longer represented by her agent. Now, her story on exactly what's happened with the agent has shifted a little bit. At first, she said that she was dropped and then later phrased it as her choosing to self-publish, which she did technically. She chose not to pursue another literary agent. She chose to go the self-publishing route, but eventually in other videos made comments about choosing to leave the agency because she wanted control over her world and her idea, only to eventually return back to the agency Drop Me, but they dropped me because they don't support science fiction and fantasy anymore, which doesn't align with what they have listed on their website. But all of that to say that for one reason or another, she wasn't with this agency anymore. She wasn't getting a whole lot of traction until she listed the pre-orders on TikTok Shop. Now, TikTok loves selling things on TikTok Shop. So the second she listed the pre-order on TikTok Shop, her videos started getting way more traction. And by the time the book actually released, she'd sold somewhere in the range of 5,000 to 7,000 pre-orders. We still don't have an exact number. Many pre-orders. Only for people, once they got the book in their hands, to not really love it and to have quite a bit of critique for it. I, like many others at the time, chalked this up to being a cautionary tale for virality not always being the dream that it seems on the surface, and wished that she had gotten to learn the lessons that her book could teach her to a much smaller audience. But then the reports started coming out that it wasn't just that the book maybe wasn't written the best, but that it genuinely might have been unedited, and that there were typos and formatting errors, and that the narrative didn't really make any sense, repetitive sentences that repeat in the chapters, sentences that repeat in and of themselves. People who had read the book started getting a little bit louder about how this wasn't a typical case of a book just not being of the highest quality, that there was something almost unique about exactly what the quality of this book was. It didn't feel finished. In making my first video, I read the first 120 pages of the book, and I do agree that it does not read as though it went through a very intensive editing process, and I can completely see why it got the reviews that it got. So that was the reaction to the book, but what was Audra's reaction to the reaction? Admittedly, not great, but she had a lot of leeway for two key reasons. The first being, this is every author's worst nightmare. There were a lot of authors out there who really felt for Audra, who understood how difficult something like this would be to go through, to put your heart and soul into something only to put it out to the world and have it be met to such poor reviews and to so many eyes. And a lot of people really felt for her. Not only that, but she's quite young. This isn't a fact that I've harped on a ton in my videos on the subject because I only think it's so relevant to her behavior. I think she's old enough that her age can contextualize a little bit, but I don't think she's quite so young as to be able to chalk all of it up to just her being young. She's 22 right now. But around the time that the book was was published, there were a lot of people defending her, bringing up her age and saying, you know, it's kind of a rite of passage for every young author to write a pretty terrible book, and it's just unfortunate that this happened in front of so many eyes, and hopefully she learns from this and grows. So at first, people were being very understanding for those two reasons. But as time has gone on, she has worn down on a lot of people's goodwill, and you'll find a lot fewer of people defending her now than were about a month ago. At first, she was adamant there was nothing wrong with the book. Then she said that there were formatting errors in the ebook, but in the same post kind of hid that she was going to do a revision of the paperback as well. And then said she was going to take a few days away from the internet, and came back to announce that she was going to be pulling this run of the book and fully revising it before re-releasing it, before almost immediately turning around to point the finger at an indie author by the name of T.L. Lewis. I did not know who the indie author was when I made my first video because he's not actually named in her video, but she made this, in my opinion, very guilt-trippy video where she's using a lot of allusions to self-harm to imply that this whole situation has been detrimental to her mental health in a way that I admittedly found a little bit manipulative. I stand by my stance that if she was being genuine in that video, then she needs help, and I hope somebody steps in to help her. But if she wasn't being genuine in that video, then I do think that it is very manipulative, and it felt a lot to me like when a partner threatens self-harm in order to stop a partner from leaving them or to manipulate certain behavior out of them. And at the same time, pointed the finger at a specific person, pointing a tirade of hate towards them. And T.L. Lewis at the time was dealing with a barrage of hate from a lot of Audra's fans, accusing him of directly impacting her mental health, all because he posted one negative video about her book where he did not name her or the book. And his video was actually quite positive and supportive and was essentially just him saying this book and this author might not have been ready for publishing, and it's just a cautionary tale to indie authors out there not to get too excited when they finish a book. Take the time to make sure that that's the book that they want to publish before going forward. Now, I have spent a lot of time in these videos debunking Audra's claim that this video was responsible for the criticisms she was receiving. Audra's video very heavily implied that she might have had some readers giving her some constructive criticism and that she was revising the book because she always wants to improve and she wants to make it the best that it can be, but that the large wave of criticism that she was getting originated with T.L. Lewis's video, and that none of that was fair criticism and everybody was just bullying her. Now, people rightfully pointed out in the comments under that first video that I maybe was a little bit too flippant about the hate she was probably getting at the time. I was really adamant that I had majority seen people being supportive of her in giving their critique, and that while I'm sure that there were people out there being really mean because it's the internet and the internet is a terrible place, that for the most part, the movement that I had seen was actually quite supportive of her. There were a few people to point out that TikTok shows you what you want to see, and that even includes comments. So it's entirely possible that because that was how I felt about it at the time, that was the content I was seeing. Fair enough, there could have been more hate than I was seeing, but I did feel at the time that the movement was majority supportive of her and wanted her to succeed and wanted her to come back with a better book out the other side of this. And I still firmly believe that if she had just fully stepped away, that if she had then come back in like a year with a revised version of the book that was significantly better, I really think she would have won everybody back over. And it would have just been a blip in the story of Book Talk, and that would have been the end of it. But after this video where she pointed the finger at T.L. Lewis, a lot of people, myself included, shifted a little bit on this situation. It revealed a side of Audra to the internet, the signs of which were always a little bit there, but I don't know how to explain it. It felt like it was this clue into the idea that she maybe wasn't the most honest or was going to say what was going to get the criticism off of her back as opposed to maybe what the truth was. And that led to people, myself included, scrutinizing other things she was saying a little bit more. And the situation has just continued to snowball from there. Despite that, it's still pinned on her page. So I think it's safe to assume that this is still her interpretation of the situation. It's unclear to me whether or not she actually believes that this is where all of the criticism is coming from, or if she knows that's not true, but she was trying to salvage her public image image and try to give people something to hold on to and try to give an excuse to some of her fans, especially the ones who hadn't received their books yet, as to why there was all this conversation about the book not being that great, even though she herself had pulled it at this point and was revising it. So that's where my first video ended. My second video was mostly focused on the two things that she posted right after that, one of which was a description of her 8-step revision process, and the other was a Q&A where she was answering a lot of other questions and criticisms that she had gotten up to this point. The only things that we really need from that video for this video here today are that her 8-step revision process involved trying to get through a chapter a week, and that she was going to be posting updates on Patreon for free because she wanted to earn the trust back of her readers. So she wanted to show that she was capable of revising the book and writing something much better, and was planning on posting regular writing updates as well as the first few chapters of the book once they were revised to show people that she had improved the book. The other thing that ends up becoming pivotal to the later series of events is that she's bringing in a new editor. She was going to do a Q&A with that editor, and that her cited reason at that point in time for why the book ended up the way that it did was that she wasn't expecting that influx of pre-orders, and she was still in the copy edit process when she was shipping out a bunch of bookmarks to fulfill the TikTok shop orders, and that led to her not having a ton of time to actually focus her attention on the copy edits. Now, I said, I think on my TikTok at some point, that this is the closest that she has gotten to taking ownership over the state that the book was in when it got published. She still has yet to just come out and say like, hey guys, I messed up. I maybe didn't write the best book. But that was where we had left it off in our videos. Now, I'll be honest with you. Most of the stuff that I'm going to present to you from here on forward actually happened a few weeks ago, fairly shortly after I uploaded my second video. Stuff was happening so quickly at that point that it felt like if I kept making a video every week, if there were updates, that I was never going to stop making videos about her because there was just so much happening all at once. So I decided to sit on it for about a month, see where things stood, and then make a big update video to capture everything. And I'm happy that I did, because there's certainly a storyline that actually works out and ends pretty nice for this video. I ended out my second video saying, unless there's a major update, I can't imagine I'm going to be making another one. Obviously, I stand corrected, here I am. But I do feel this time that we actually are at the season finale of the Audra Winter story. I don't doubt that there will be a season 2 when she returns with the new version of the book, but I do at this point in time believe that this is wrapping this situation up for now. Okay, well, with all of that out of the way, let's dive in to the updates. First new thing that we have to look at is a post that she made on August 18th. Which was another Q&A that only had 2 slides on it. At this point in time, she was setting a pattern of doing these weekly Q&As on Mondays. This one was fairly short, and it was just to tell people that she had found an editor. She was planning on having the editor do the following week's Q&A, and that they were making big changes and big things were coming, and so she wasn't going to update that much this week. Then on August 23rd, she posted a TikTok reintroduction. This seems to be her attempt to spin the narrative, try and win people back over, try to reintroduce herself and explain some things, clarify some things. It's fairly long, but I do want to show you a lot of it because it's quite interesting to me.
There was music here that I cut out, but it was really awkward, all silent, and so I'm gonna talk over it instead with a little bit of voiceover because I cut the music out because I was worried it was copyright.
I believe I've been improperly introduced to you. I'm a 22-year-old entrepreneur, writer, and naturalist.
Eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed I got a new phone from the last time we did this. I'm actually going to take this thing off the back of it. I love this. This is this Moft like phone stand thing. This is so great if you ever like film things on your phone or make content, but it is kind of heavy. So I'm not usually a latest and greatest phone kind of girly, but the quality of my TikToks leaves room to be desired, and the selfie cam on this thing is great. So entrepreneur, writer, and naturalist in that order. Now, one of the things that people have called out about this situation is that she really pivoted at one point from the story being writing is my dream to having a creative studio with all these artists and being this entrepreneur is my dream. I just realized I completely left that out of the recap. Part of this whole thing is that she had commissioned a bunch of art for the book and had told a bunch of people that she had hired these artists. I now have very much reason to believe that they were in fact commissions, which was my suspicion this whole time. But for some reason, she couldn't just say that, so it kind of became this point of contention for people. But at some point, her story pivoted from my dream is to be an author to my dream is to be this entrepreneur of this creative studio. And I think it really is such a marker of something that I talked about a little bit in my second video, where some people have said that she's a great marketer. She was really able to sell the book before it came out, but that skill maybe didn't translate to writing. I made the argument that I don't actually think she knows that much about marketing, and I think that this shows exactly what I mean. Marketing, PR, is about narratives, it's about storyline. And she very much crafted this public image of a young girl whose dream was to be an author, who was doing everything she could to make that dream a reality. And she'd been working on this book forever, and that it was her passion project, and she was super invested in it. And then, about a month before the book released, was when she kind of pivoted into this entrepreneur storyline, which is wildly different from how she was presenting herself before. So her storyline completely shifted. And what she seems to not really understand about what's going on right now is that I wonder how much of it ties to how important her story was in her life to selling that first book, and how much she relied on pity marketing and talking about how much her book and her story meant to her to sell it. Because when that's your marketing strategy, if anything comes along that hints to people that you aren't as wholesome as you've led them to believe, or if there's any hintings that there was any sort of misleading there, people will turn on you in an instant. And that's what I mean about her maybe not really understanding that much about PR and marketing itself. Because if you brand yourself as a certain thing and then you shift that brand really quickly, like as quickly as she did, almost turning on a dime, people start to lose their trust in you because they start to wonder if they really know you that well at all. And that's why if any of you out there are thinking about starting to make content, I highly recommend just focusing on making entertaining content. If people are following you and rooting for you because they like the content that you make, I think that leads to a lot more stable a career because it's the content people are coming to you for. And so as long as you continue generally making content that entertains them, you can get away with a few duds here and there, but overarchingly they like most of your videos, then you'll maintain that audience. Whereas if you sell yourself as the brand and you sell your story as the brand, then if anything in there ends up not being the most true, or if the branding shifts all of a sudden, and now you're talking about different things and you're selling different things and you're sort of framing yourself in a different way, then it leads to this feeling of disingenuousness and this wondering of if there was honesty to begin with. And I think that that's a lot of what's happened to Audra here. I think that because she has so strongly sold herself as an entrepreneur since the book has sold well, it just rubs people the wrong way. And I just think it's such a sign to me that she maybe still isn't really grasping that her reintroduction started with her as an entrepreneur and then a writer and then a naturalist, which I actually knew about her, but I hadn't included into any of my videos because I didn't think it was relevant. I have no idea what her actual degree is in. She's talked a little bit about loving nature, going to college for something nature related, and having jobs related to animals, nature, the outdoors, and things of the like. Let's continue.
Some of my favorite things are wolves, ecology, my dog, the ocean, and, of course, writing.
It's a really interesting video to have chosen.
You probably know me from that last one. In the past month or so, I have become known for what is literally my worst nightmare. So obviously we took some time to calm down and talk with the studio and make some plans, hire an editor. So now let me tell you exactly what my goal is, what my intentions are, and who I am.
So I do still, despite myself, really feel for her in what she said about this being her worst nightmare. Even as I critique her behavior, I just want it known that there are significantly worse crimes that people have committed in life than writing a bad book and reacting poorly to people reacting poorly to the book. It's just a book at the end of the day. And I actually think part of why this situation has become such a big thing is because at the end of the day, the actual harm done is somewhat minimal. It's a crazy story with a ton of twists and turns, but it doesn't leave you with that sick to your stomach feeling in the end. Every event that happens just seems so out of nowhere. And there was a point where every time I saw something new, I was like, no way. But it doesn't really leave you to confront the depths of the horrors of humanity. And I actually think that's why it's become such a big thing, because people can talk about it so openly without having to leave with that really gross feeling that you sometimes get hearing about how horrible some people in this world can be. And so I do just want to stress, yes, I'm about to give you the whole rest midst of the updates and admittedly have some critiques. But at the end of the day, it is just a book, you know? So I think we all need to remember that. But the reason I paused it is because I do think it's really interesting that she doesn't say what that nightmare is. Again, she's trying to reintroduce herself. She's trying to reframe the narrative, and she doesn't really say what happened. She doesn't really describe it. She just says it was her worst nightmare.
I'm a full-time author and founder of a creative studio with artists from across the world, all working to develop a literature-based multimedia series centered around the Zodiac-based fantasy world that I began developing when I was 12.
Multimedia series. And that's where a lot of people are just getting real confused. This whole creative studio aspect of this story has been so fascinating because Audra, at this point in time, is somewhat the definition of the saying, putting the cart before the horse. She really wants to have this creative studio with these artists that are based around her world and this multimedia empire based around her media, but she has not yet actually written media that people want to read. I don't want to be rude, but like she has yet to write a book that people really want. People have found job listings related to the world of Guardian for 2D animators, musicians, and just like a bunch of stuff that it's just kind of confusing as to why you would need that. In the beginning, I feel like people were really trying to get her to understand that what she needed to do was take a step back and just revise the book. She still doesn't really seem to internalize that. Like she still doesn't really seem to understand that it's probably not the best idea for her to be pushing this multimedia series so hard when she hasn't yet written a super solid text for it all to be based off of.
I want my novels to be a blend of narrative prose and artistic storytelling.
Okay, that confused the shit out of me the first time I watched this. I was like, narrative prose and artistic storytelling? Isn't that just what all books are? And then I realized that she means she wants the art to actually mean something. She's about to explain that.
My chapters are written out like a normal fiction book, but there are also critical parts of the story that are told by illustration.
I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't think that that's the best idea, strictly because there is already a form of a novel that is a blend of maybe not literary prose, but prose and artistic storytelling, and that's graphic novels, of which I have recently become an owner of 2 of the Twilight ones. I mean, we're all familiar with graphic novels, right? I don't need to show you an example. I don't know why I grabbed that. Just to show off that I got it, maybe. Okay, it's just gonna hope that looked relatively similar to how it looked before. But she doesn't want to do a graphic novel. She wants text, like chapter text, to be interspersed with images. Not new, many authors have done that, including a Monsieur Brandon Sanderson, who many think she's modeling her whole company thing after. I forget if I talked about that in my second video. Actually, I should probably grab book 1 to make sure I don't spoil something. Anyway, Brandon Sanderson in his fantasy novels, at the very least in the Way of King series, has these images that support what you're reading in the text. So you'll get drawings of characters and creatures and things to help you visualize things as you read. But notably, those images aren't critical to the narrative, meaning that if you didn't look at them at all, you wouldn't be confused by the book itself. The book stands on its own, and you could read the book on its own without all the images. The images just enhance the reading experience. If I'm understanding what Audra is describing correctly, then I believe what she's describing is different. I believe that what she's describing is that the images themselves would be pivotal to the story in some way. I don't know if that means that they would become graphic novel pages, which is an idea I don't actually dislike that much, of a book that goes back and forth from more text-based chapters to graphic novel style scenes. I think if done well, that sort of idea might be able to work, but I'm not sure if that's what she means or if she means genuinely just having images, but somehow the images are part of the story and they're pivotal to the story. I think it's the critical to the story piece of what she's saying that really scares me, because I think a lot of people skip those art pages. I think a lot of people don't look at them unless you put some kind of disclaimer in the beginning saying they have to look at the art for the story to make sense. You're probably going to have a lot of people skip over it. Anyway, let's continue.
My aim is to uphold artistic kinship, collaboration, imagination, and innovation. I am absolutely dedicated to pioneering a new avenue of publishing that equalizes the storytelling between both writers and artists.
That exists. It's called a graphic novel. And let me just show it again in case anybody missed it. They're books that have text and images, and they're equally as important usually. This part of her reintroduction bothered me a little bit. She's talking about pioneering a new avenue in publishing, inventing her own, not just genre of book, but like style of book. Really, there's one of three possibilities here. She either ends up with a graphic novel, which is not a new form of storytelling, or she ends up with a novel that has pictures in it that support the storytelling that she's doing and help the audience imagine the things that she's describing that don't exist in our world, in which case that's also not a new idea. Many authors do that. I was able to just pull one off my shelf. Or she genuinely is going to do something kind of new where it's not a graphic novel, but it's not a chapter book that has supporting images either. It's a chapter book that has images that are critical to the storytelling. And if that is what she's doing, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I am saying that there's very many ways that idea could go wrong and very few in which they could go right.
So how'd I get here? While the short answer is a couple of scholarships, there is a much larger story to be told.
So this is something that has come up since my second video. She's talked about using scholarship money to partially fund this whole thing, and a bunch of people are wondering if she's allowed to do that. We have no idea. It depends on what scholarship, where she got it from, and what the rules of the scholarship were. There are many types of scholarships where the money goes directly to the school, or because the money's coming from the school, then it just goes directly to your tuition. But there are forms of scholarships where you are just given money directly, and it really is up to you to spend that money however you see fit to support your education. So it is entirely possible that she had scholarships that she could use the money on anything she wanted. I think she's just mentioning it because people keep accusing her of being a Nepo baby or coming from money. And so I think she's trying to establish that this whole thing was partially funded by scholarship money. But she sold so much in pre-orders that if she didn't place the order for the physical books until after she had a good number of the pre-orders, then she would have had all the money from the pre-orders to order the books. So I wouldn't even be surprised if the scholarship thing was a little bit misleading on her part. I guess what I'm getting at is I don't think she needed to be a Nepo baby or to have scholarship money to have achieved this. She sold so many pre-orders that if she took the money from the early pre-orders and used those to order the physical books, then it makes perfect sense to me how she afforded to do this.
When I listed the pre-order for my debut novel, it instantly took off, even when I wasn't expecting to sell more than 100 copies at most. Instead of printing my books on demand, I contacted...
That's not true. I probably should have let her finish the sentence. I got my copy of The Age of Scorpius print on demand. Let me grab it so I can prove that to you. It's actually downstairs. All right, so this is my copy of The Age of Scorpius by Audra Winter. I ordered it on August 1st, and if you look at the back page, made in the USA, Las Vegas, Nevada, 1st of August, 2025. And I got mine off of Amazon. So my book was print on demand. In reality, what she did is that you could get print on demand books from Amazon, but if you ordered the book from TikTok Shop, then it was books that she ordered from a printer and distributed herself. So she partially did print on demand and partially did herself as a distributor. But these are the moments with her where I want to shake her almost. The more that you fib in these tiny ways that seem inconsequential, the more you wear down your credibility, where people will start to wonder whether or not they can trust anything that you're saying. And that's not a position you want to be in with your audience. This isn't that big a deal. She has since announced that she's not going to be doing print on demand anymore because she doesn't want to support Amazon and she wants more of the profits for herself and her business, all of which is fair. I don't know what the point of fibbing, and I'm going to use the word fib because technically it is a lie, but it's such an inconsequential lie. It's such a silly thing to lie about. Why would she say instead of doing print on demand when you fully did do print on demand, you just did both? It's hard to gaslight people into not believing that you said something if there's video evidence of you saying it, and if that video evidence is still on TikTok. And she still has videos and Q&A up just before this video on her page of her saying she's discontinuing print on demand.
We are completely discontinuing print on demand, so you will not be able to find this book on like Amazon or Barnes & Noble anymore. Instead of printing my books on demand,
it's not like it's a big deal. It's not like she's harming anybody by saying this, but it's just like, why? Why lie about this?
A large book printer that publishers use and ordered my stock of books to independently distribute. This allowed me to retain a significant portion of the profit made from a book sale, and I did all of this on a very small initial budget by pre-funding from the books themselves. themselves. I ended up selling thousands of copies of my debut within a matter of 3 months. Prior to its formal release, The Age of Scorpius had over 7,000 pre-orders. If you're wondering what I did with all that money, I turned it right back into my company. I established a creative studio hiring a global team of artists of both contractors and employees aiming to further develop the series. Starting in April, I was actively establishing my business and creative studio, managing finances, marketing, team managing, revising and editing, coordinating communications, and somehow also managing to pack and ship 7,000 bubble mailer pre-packages for the pre-orders before the books had even arrived to me. I delivered 5,000 highly anticipated brand new books to thousands of people all at once.
So right there, she said she sent out 7,000 bookmark bubble mailers, but then 5,000 books. But the bubble mailers were for the pre-orders for the books. And this is like the number of pre-orders that she sold has changed so much. There is a concrete number out there. This is a tangible thing. This is a number that you could just say. Like, there is a number of pre-orders that she sold before the book came out, and she knows what that number is. This brings me back to a comment that I got under my second video, where I started to harp on how she never shared the exact number of artists that she had, and it was always a range. And somebody commented that this is something that's really common among people who lie a lot. If you want to bolster yourself up and fib a little bit to make something sound more impressive than it is, then giving a range gives you this benefit of the doubt of if the true number ends up being at the bottom end of the range or towards the bottom end of the range, you weren't technically lying. And so they had wondered if that's what was going on with the ranges of her employees. And I wonder if that's kind of what's going on with the pre-order book sales as well. She'll say around 7,000, around 6,000, around 5,000. And this gives her this ambiguity of like, well, it was around there, but like how many were there? I just think it's crazy that she filmed this and she edited it. And back to back, she said 2 different numbers and didn't flag that as something she should change before she uploaded it. 7,000 bubble mailers, but 5,000 books. Where are the other 2,000? Were there 2,000 books she hasn't shipped out yet? That's entirely possible, because I know that there are some pre-orders that she hadn't shipped by the time the book actually launched. But did she send out those bubble mailers before the books got to her? Because that's what she said. I had sent out the 7,000 bubble mailers before the books even got to me. And then she shipped out 5,000 books. Are there 2,000 missing books, or is one of these numbers incorrect? One of those things has to be true, right?
I did everything I could to make the book the best version of itself that it could be. I hired both a developmental and a copy editor, and I ended up spending days straight in my cafe for months on end. So what went wrong? And why am I getting all this criticism? I realized a severe and critical error in my book. During the process of being thrown into the position as a business owner in April and May, I was also in the final copy edit and proofing stages of the book. From the amount of shock and exhaustion I was going through, I failed to give that critical process my full attention and fell short without even realizing it until after the book was in people's hands and this all started.
So once again, we're back at this explanation that she gave in one of the Q&As, which is that she was so busy during the copy edit process that she didn't pay the edits the attention they deserved. But I want to call out one of the stills. One of the things that I've consistently noted throughout this story was that in February, she announced that she was going to be releasing the book in May, and it ended up actually releasing in June. But also in February, she announced that she was starting the process of looking for editors. That's not enough time to edit a book. But I want to call out a specific still. She's putting these images on the screen that are Snapchats from her working on the book that I think is her trying to dispel the narrative that she didn't put that much work or effort into it, and that she was kind of scamming people and lying about how much she cared about this or how much work she put into it. And one of them said, "I didn't even procrastinate this. I started this 3 weeks ago." So she was under the gun to finish some edits and said, "I didn't even procrastinate them. I started them 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks is not enough time to meaningfully implement edits that you've been given. To me, this video further reinforces what I believe to be true, which is that she doesn't really understand how much time these things take. And so to her, she spent all this time on editing, when from us looking in from the outside, we're like, 3 weeks. No wonder the book felt unedited, you know?
If you want to know more about what exactly went wrong, we have now posted the first revised chapter to Patreon for free. Anybody can access it. And we've also posted the editor notes from both April and May in comparison to the editor notes from our editor now.
Whoa, that was a lot of information all at once. We took a turn. So she went from saying, yeah, I didn't give the editor's notes enough time, enough attention, was too overwhelmed, too chaotic, only to then immediately say, and if you want to know what happened, I've posted the new revised chapter and I've also posted the old editor notes in comparison to the new editor notes. I saw that and I immediately thought, oh my God, is she going to pivot to trying to blame the old editors? Not only that, but then she said the editor's notes from April and May. So I told you that she had said in February that she was looking for editors, and she had always planned to release the book in May, but ended up releasing it in June. So now here she's saying the notes from April and May, which means she would have gotten the editor's notes sometime in April and May based off of how she was saying it, and the book released in June. So now the 3 weeks makes a lot of sense. I feel like we're starting to see why the book was in the state it was in when it published, but we're starting to get the icky feeling that she maybe is pivoting to blame the old editors.
I've received a ton of amazing feedback. I've talked about this in other videos and how we're actually incorporating it, but we have literally gone through every corner of the internet and found the critique from our reader base and from the audience and put them in a document. And we're having discussions as a team. I'm having one-on-one discussions with my editor. We're incorporating that. And I just wanted to say, like, genuinely, thank you so much for that feedback, because I am looking to improve as a writer and I've been given this chance to improve as a writer. And I am super grateful for that. And I'm super grateful for the people who are willing to give us a second chance and give me a second chance as a writer. I love my team. I love my team and I love what I do. It is every single thing to me. It is my entire heart and soul. 100% of my time, every waking hour and minute goes. So let's try this one more time. My name is Audra Winter and welcome to the world.
So she ends it off with this thank you for your feedback sort of thing, which I think is her trying to combat the narrative that she doesn't take feedback well. That's been what a lot of people have said about her. And I think that she's trying to undo that a little bit by having this heartfelt seeming thank you for your feedback, we're going to implement it thing that she threw in at the end of her reintroduction. But that was her TikTok reintroduction. And at the time that she posted that, as I mentioned, I was a little bit worried that it was a sign that she was gearing up to pivot to blaming the editors. And so I went to her Patreon, as one does. Now, one fact that you'll learn about me through the duration of this video is I'm not good at saving things when I see them for the first time. For reasons that will become clear, I wasn't able to access them myself. So shout out to my booktube community, because a lot of people have been covering this. Shout out Taylor Rose. She's been making some videos on this, and I actually screenshotted this thing I'm about to show you from one of her videos. But shout out to her, because I did not save the editor's notes when I saw them on Patreon, regrettably. Later, I will give a big shout out to book lover Laura, but I'll just shout her out here right now because I also didn't save a Q&A that we'll have to talk about in a bit. Shout out to my fellow booktube girlies. I appreciate you guys for being better than I am about saving receipts. I was actually kind of curious to see the editor's notes. I wanted to see the feedback that she got. I was curious to see what 2 editors had given her, and what I found was quite shocking. It's a still image with 3 pages of her book side by side. On one page it says developmental edit and there's 1 line highlighted. On the middle page it says copy edit and there's 1 line highlighted. And then there's a new editor page that has a bunch of highlights. This was just an image. There was no way to see what the notes on the highlights were. There was no elaboration beyond that. It was an image with the 3 pages side by side and the highlights, and that was it. And immediately my first thought was, this is probably not real. I'm sorry, I don't want to be rude. I don't want to be rude, but I wouldn't say I trust her the most right now. It's clear that she's trying to frame it out to show that her old editors didn't give her as much feedback as this new editor, but she either cherry-picked these pages, because this is the argument she's trying to make, right? So she chose these pages potentially because they had so few markups on them, and we have no idea what all the other pages look like in the markups that she got. But there's also just the possibility that it's entirely fake, and that she just took a page of the original manuscript, copied it 3 times, highlighted 1 line on 2 pages, and then on the 3rd page just highlighted a bunch of random stuff. Or that the 3rd page is genuine edits from her new editor, but then the first 2 pages were fake. We can't really judge anything off of this. It tells us nothing. nothing. We know nothing about how much feedback she got from her editors on this alone. But the other thing she uploaded was the new revised chapter. I went so back and forth on how in-depth I was going to go about this. When she first posted this, there was a conversation going down over on TikTok about whether or not the new chapter was ready for publishing. I will tell you, I do think it is better than the first chapter from the original version of the book. I do think improvements have been made. I saw a lot of people saying they thought that she used AI because it was so much better than the original first chapter. In a weird way, was trying to... Is defend her the right word? I was just trying to make the point that I don't think it was AI that did this. I do think it was her, but it's because there's a lot of mistakes that she's making in the new first chapter that she did make in the original first chapter as well that lead me to believe that they were written by the same author. And as a result, I broke down one paragraph really close, and I did get a lot of positive feedback on it, but I'm hesitant to do that too intensely because I feel like that's kind of rude. She did not ask me for my feedback, so to take the chapter and do in-depth edits without her permission to me is a little bit crass. I don't really want to do that. But that being said, I do have thoughts and feelings on the chapter as a whole, and so I am going to give you general thoughts, and I am going to pull evidence from it to show you what I mean. My thoughts drifted to what lay beyond the forest boundary, soon interrupted by a wet nose pressed against my black shirt. Needles of sharp teeth poked through the fabric. Although I appreciated the kind sentiment behind the affectionate nibbles, I gently brushed the wolf's snout away. I didn't want a collection of teeth marks on my side later. The wolf slipped under my crimson cloak and curled around my legs, peering up at me. I met its gaze, then looked back at the border of lanterns. The wolf's ears swiveled and perked at the sight of snowy traveler's road, a stark contrast from the forest we lived in. This is a really common thing in very new authors. I've talked about this at length in talking about the situation on my other platforms, so I apologize for those of you that I'm repeating this for. Adjectives are our descriptors when we make sentences. So when I need to describe a noun to you, I use an adjective to do that. In our colloquial speech, we only do this when there is some kind of pivotal piece of information about the noun. If I say something like, we were trying to film on a green screen, but she had a shirt on, so her torso totally disappeared. That sentence is confusing. But if I say we were filming on a green screen and she had a green shirt on, and so her torso completely disappeared, now the sentence makes sense. The fact that the shirt was green mattered to the sentence. But if I said to you, do you think this shirt is cute? I don't need to give you any adjectives about the shirt myself, right? I don't need to say, do you think this white shirt with a bear on it is cute that I'm wearing? And so when we're speaking colloquially, we just don't usually do that. You usually only use an adjective in front of a noun if there is something very specific about that noun that you need to get across in what you're saying. Now, obviously, writing is a little bit different than spoken word, and adjectives are used a little bit more often. However, it is a common trap for young authors to fall into when they think, oh, I need to write description. I want very descriptive language. I want the reader to really be able to visualize what I'm describing. And so you start to think you need an adjective before every noun. And if you have a noun without an adjective, that you're not writing very descriptive fiction. But we don't really talk that way in our colloquial speech. So the sentences can end up feeling very chunky and unnatural sounding and very long, and they don't flow super well. And I think it's just important to remember that an adjective is not your only tool for writing good description. And that there is a school of thought in writing, one that I subscribe to pretty heavily, that adjectives are best used when they're needed. When I'm telling you something that you wouldn't immediately assume about a noun that I'm sharing with you. When I was talking about the very first paragraph of this chapter on TikTok, I talked about her saying it's like flourishing sword ferns or something right like that. She uses the word flourishing to describe the greenery in this forest. But if I tell you to think of a forest, you're immediately going to think of a pretty lush, pretty green forest. And so I really only need to give you an adjective to describe that forest if the forest is not lush. You know, if it's barren or abandoned or haunted feeling or something like that, then I need to give you those adjectives because that's not something you would immediately assume about that forest. And then obviously my green shirt example, in a situation like that, obviously if the adjective is pivotal to you understanding what I'm describing, then of course I should use it as well. In my opinion, this is Audra's Achilles heel. Every one of her sentences is chock full of adjectives. I've picked out this paragraph in particular to call it out. I'm going to read you this paragraph again, and this time I am going to take out every single adjective that's placed before a noun. And you tell me if you were able to visualize what the paragraph says. My thoughts drifted to what lay beyond the forest boundary, soon interrupted by a nose pressed against my shirt. Needles of teeth poked through the fabric. Although I appreciated the sentiment behind the nibbles, I brushed the wolf's snout away. I didn't want a collection of teeth marks on my side later. The wolf slipped under my cloak and curled around my legs, peering up at me. I met its gaze, then looked back to the border of lanterns. The wolf's ears swiveled and perked at the sight of the traveler's road. Actually, you know what? I changed my mind. Snowy, you need. Oh, but you see what I mean. We need that one because the fact that the road is snowy is important. You wouldn't immediately assume the road was snowy if you weren't told that. The wolf's ears swiveled and perked at the sight of the snowy traveler's road, a contrast from the forest we lived in. And you can understand everything I just said, couldn't you? And probably pictured it pretty strong. I took out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 adjectives. It's a trap. You don't need that many adjectives. Take them out. Here's another moment I wanted to call out. With hands stiff from the frigid air, I carefully placed a sheet of paper against one of the lowest stones, sweeping a stick of charcoal over the etching. Black dust smeared across my fingers and clung to my face as I blew away the excess, revealing what I'd traced. The result of the action predates the action itself in the sentence, which is confusing because the action described in the sentence before could also explain this result that she's describing. So when I read this for the first time, I thought that just her tracing the runes had caused all this black dust to fly around and smear, but then the sentence later says, as I blew away the excess, meaning that what happened is she blew away the excess and it all blew back in her face. So I think that sentence would be a lot more effective if she flipped that around. Oh, this one, I'm sorry. I do have to highlight this line just because it made me laugh so hard. I reached into my bag until I found my notebook. I understand that she means rustled, right? I dug through my bag until I found my notebook, but phrasing it this way made me imagine like a Mary Poppins bag where she had to reach and just keep reaching and keep reaching and keep reaching until she found the notebook. I know that's not what she meant, and maybe that's me editing in bad faith, but another thing I want to call out is this is supposed to be the revised first chapter, and one of the big pieces of feedback that she got was about the typos and the formatting errors and things like that. She had this whole big thing happen online partially because of that, and yet this revised first chapter has a typo. The history of Conviction Woods was rewritten to conceal the knowledge that the fact wasn't always cursed. So I think I know exactly how the sentence came to be. I think it probably originally said the history of Conviction Woods was rewritten to conceal the fact that it wasn't always cursed. And then maybe she decided to change fact to knowledge, or the editor gave her that note, I'm not sure. And when she went to edit the sentence, she ended up with this. I can't figure out a way in which the sentence makes sense. Maybe you guys can, but I think it's a typo. Oh wait, there's another thing I wanted to call out right above that. The text on the arch before me was written in a disjointed, modernized rendition of ancient Drixall, while the historical record was written in accurate ancient Drixall. And then she immediately concludes that she's not looking at the same arch as what's in the record that she's looking at. I have this tiny little thing, I think, shows so much area for growth, because this character can't read Drixall, which I know because I've read the original, or the first 120 pages of the original. Drixall is an ancient language in this universe that there isn't really supposed to be anybody in the modern day that can read it. So how does she know that the version that's on the arch is, modernized and disjointed? If she can't read the language, then how on earth would she know? I don't speak Spanish. If somebody wrote 2 Spanish sentences and put them in front of me, and one was a super formal old version of Spanish and another one was a more modernized version that maybe wasn't grammatically correct, I would have no idea because I don't speak Spanish. I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between those 2 sentences. So I don't really understand, if she can't speak these languages, how she would know the difference. But not only that, why would she immediately assume that it's a fake arch? Wouldn't it be a lot more logical conclusion for the character in this moment that the record that she's looking at is inaccurate? Especially because the character is a historian. I think that it's a lot more plausible that somebody fabricated a record or just didn't write it down correctly than it is that somebody built an entire fake stone arch. So I don't know why the character jumps to the conclusion that the arch is fake instead of that potentially the record that she's looking at is fake. But then she's immediately saying somebody built a second arch. Like, why? Why would someone do that? Why would your brain jump to that? So then later in the chapter, she's never seen a wolf leave Conviction Woods before. She doesn't even think that they can. And then she sees one run out of the woods, afraid of something that was in the woods. And then this patrol of humans comes around the corner, and she's more scared of the humans than she is of the woods, to the point where she's willing to enter the woods even after seeing this shocking sight with the wolf. But the way that she describes her fear of the Scorpio Patrol, she starts with, they'd berate me, and then goes to, I would rather face whatever was in the forest than face the wrath of the regime. I did not want to deal with an extra interrogation. I could already hear their condescending voices, the incessant questions about what I was doing this far from the hub, why I wasn't doing something for more useful. This is what I meant on TikTok about it being very similar things that I clocked in the first book, or the first version of it, just to a lesser degree. And that's why I believe this was written by her, because one of my big complaints about the original version of this book were that the stakes didn't often match the behavior of the characters. So here, there's this haunted magical forest that she can enter, but most people can't, or they'll be killed by these wolves. She's never seen a wolf leave the woods, and she knows that they want to, and when she leaves the woods, they try to follow her, but they always stay within the boundary. She sees one of them scared for the first time ever in her life, and also running from something in the woods, and yet this patrol comes around the corner and she's worried about them berating her. Like, it just doesn't match. But then, if you turn to the next page, I couldn't risk showing up at home with more bruises. So here we're establishing that these interrogations do get corporal, physical in nature, that like she might be beaten if she's found by this patrol. Okay, so now we have maybe a little bit more explanation as to why she would choose whatever scared the wolf out of the woods over the patrol. But why wasn't that her first thought? Like, she sees the patrol and she thinks, oh my god, they're so annoying when they interrogate me, and I can just hear their incessant voices, and like, ugh, I don't want to deal with that. And also they beat me. Like, I just don't think this is a realistic thought process for her to have gone through. And for me as the reader, because it was presented in that order, I had already had the thought of, wait, what? Why would she choose the woods if her alternative is just being annoyed in this interrogation? And then it's like, oh, because she's going to be physically harmed in this interrogation. But if that's the case, then why wouldn't that fear have been triggered immediately by seeing the patrol, where she would have been like, oh my god, I can't get found out by them, they'll beat me. And then to further my point about the stakes not matching the character's behavior, she runs into the woods, which she's just seen this wolf run out of scared, and basically flops down and is just like, oh, whew, thank god I avoided the patrol. I want to harken back to a point that I made in my first video on it when I was covering the book itself, where I talked about a scene where they're running from some guards that are chasing them, and then they get pulled into a building by somebody they don't know. And yet the characters are so chill about this, and the main character is described as shaking out her coat and looking around the room, and we get some room description before they find out who the person is who grabbed them. And I just thought that was so unrealistic. If you're running from people, and if you know that the government essentially is chasing you down, and there's all these people chasing you down, and then somebody you don't know grabs you and throws you into a random building, I feel like your assumption would be that they mean you harm. And yes, this character didn't mean them harm, but how did they know that? So here we're seeing something like this again, where our main character re-enters the forest knowing that something has just spooked this wolf out of the woods, and she makes a very big deal out of that in the chapter. She's never seen that before. That's super freaky. And yet, the second she gets into the woods, she's just like, oh, thank god I avoided that patrol. And then is essentially re-startled by how quiet the woods are, and was like, wait, something scared that wolf. I should probably figure out what it is. And then this half-dead moose appears, and I'm gonna say this very gently. I understand that she is a naturalist. The everyday person does not know what palmate antlers are, or what an ungulate is. I had to look up both those things to get a visual for this creature. I say that gently because I know she's knowledgeable on this subject, and sometimes it can be hard when you're knowledgeable on something to understand what other people don't know. But I mean, maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe everybody knows what an ungulate is. Ungulate? I don't even know how you say it. But anyway, the creature leads her to the real arch that she was looking for. So it also knew about the fake arch, and it knew that she wanted to see the real one somehow. Shout out to the undead moose of the world. They help you on your quests. That's as in depth as I want to go. I just pulled out a few examples of things I wanted to show you, of things that are somewhat consistent through the chapter and through Audra's writing in general. Just a lot of adjectives, and the stakes of the situation not really matching the behavior of the characters. So those were the two documents that she had up on her Patreon, but let's talk about the Patreon for a little bit, because she had said that she started up this Patreon to build trust back in her reader base. So she was going to be giving the writing updates for free, and then that the first few chapters were going to be free, and then obviously they were going to start doing that, or else she would just put the whole book for free on Patreon, but that she was at the very least going to upload the first few chapters so that people could see that she was revising it and improving it, and then go from there. She has since added a pay tier. If you look at the actual numbers of people on the Patreon, there is a giant disparity between the free members and the paid members. And I think that probably is what motivated her to add another pay tier. So originally it was just $0 and $5, but she added a $2 tier where the beginning of the writing updates are free for anybody. But if you want to see the entire writing update, you have to pay $2. Now listen, if you want to paywall content, paywall your content, because people can just decide not to pay for it. I don't think that there's anything necessarily immoral about doing this. I just think it's not conducive to her doing exactly what she has said she was setting out to do, which is rebuild trust in her audience. She has cited that her goal in uploading this stuff to Patreon is to rebuild trust. And so her making it all free was part of that, was to say, hey, I know I asked you for your money and I maybe didn't give you a product that you loved. And so I'm going to give you some free updates on the new stuff that I'm doing to rebuild the trust between you and me so that you might feel more comfortable buying the book again. I think adding the paywall tier just doesn't support her in that. And not only that, but I'm showing my hand a little bit here. I'm pulling out of the chronology for a second, but she actually hasn't posted another revised chapter since this chapter 1 was posted on August 23rd. I'm actually filming this on September 23rd. And so it's been a full month since she's given a revised chapter. She said in her own breakdown of the revision process that she wanted to do a chapter a week. And I already showed how even at that speed, she wouldn't be able to make what is her current publishing deadline. They've posted writing updates sharing what else they've done. So it's not that they're not working on it, and it's not that they're not updating the audience, but they promised the audience new chapters, and they promised the audience weekly writing updates. And then there's this extra tier that you can pay for where you get the art as well. And I didn't pay for the pay tier. I don't think it's right for me to pay for a paywall and then tell people what's behind it, you know? But there are people now commenting saying, hey, where are the writing updates? Audra was sick for the last one, now she's moving. And that's also the problem with doing the pay tiers. If you're not asking for money, then you can just not provide it, and who's gonna care? If nobody was paying for anything on this Patreon, then nobody would really care if she was missing writing updates. But she has some very dedicated fans who are paying for this subscription to the Patreon, and then she is not providing them what they're paying. And she has excuses as to right now. Like I said, she was sick and now she's moving. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I just think she's not setting herself up for success here. The whole point of this was to rebuild trust. I took your money and I didn't provide the best product in return. And so now I'm trying to prove to you that I can do that. But now she's once again taking people's money and not providing anything in return. She's trying to show that we can trust her with our money, but instead is showing that she maybe is setting a pattern of taking money and not providing the service back in response. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention when I was breaking down the chapter itself is that the plot has drastically changed from the original first chapter. The original first chapter was just her finding the arch, and then a Scorpio patrol comes by and she runs into the woods and somebody tries to follow her into the woods and one of the wolves chases them, and that's how we got the setting and establishment of the wolves. Now there's this false arch sort of thing going on with this undead moose that leads her to the second arch. This is a wildly different plot of the first chapter than the original one was. She has shared in the past that when she does revisions, she just rewrites from front to back. And we on this channel have mused that that is potentially why the book ended up feeling the way that it did, because if you do a big rewrite as a revision, then you're just rewriting a first draft. And so you might improve upon your first draft, but you're still just making a first draft. And first drafts always have things like inconsistencies and things that you forgot about, leads that you planted and never did anything with. Those kinds of things are always going to exist in a first draft, regardless of how many times you've rewritten a first draft. You have to start editing the drafts that you have in order to get rid of some of that stuff. And so it scares me that we've had such a big plot shift in this chapter, because it worries me that she's doing the same thing where she's just kind of rewriting the book instead of actually revising what she published. And finally, last thing I'll say about the Patreon before we'll move on is that they put up a post saying that they are no longer accepting critique on the Patreon itself. Comment policy. This was posted on September 2nd. Hello everyone, Elrose here. They're one of the team members. After much internal discussion, we've decided on a new rule. We will no longer be accepting critiques on this page. We have heard a great deal of feedback from readers both here and on other social media. Some has been respectful and appreciated, some less so. There comes a time when the deluge is no longer helpful and the comment section has begun to resemble a public critique workshop. There is no possible way to meet every reader's requests, suggestions, and individual taste. We're a team of professionals and we have a specific creative vision to pursue. When we're ready for outside feedback on the revised edition, we will recruit beta readers. Rest assured that this Patreon will be one of the places we source such readers when the time comes. In the meantime, if you want to discuss your critical thoughts on The Age of Scorpius or its author, there are many places to do that elsewhere. We will now be deleting any comments with unsolicited advice or critique. If someone repeatedly violates this rule, they will be banned. I understand this may seem harsh to some, particularly in light of the problems in the first edition, but it is not a norm in any creative industry to bombard an artist with an avalanche of unasked for critique. It has become so severe across multiple platforms that it has interfered with Audra's motivation and morale. To make the book that we all want to see, we need to close the windows for a while and focus. Updates on revision progress, world building, and art will continue, but this is going to be a space for discussion, questions, and appreciation, not critical feedback or advice on our process. If there comes a time when we want that, we will explicitly ask for it. This is an important boundary during a storm of bad press. If after reading this, you decide to stick around for the journey ahead, you have my deepest gratitude. So I have so many mixed thoughts and feelings and opinions about this. Because on one hand, I firmly believe that as a creator, it is your right to curate the audience experience that you want to have. Some people hate it when people delete comments. If your comment is really mean and really rude, I'm gonna delete it, and I might hide you from the channel so I won't see your comments in the future. I'm well within my right to do that. I find that there's a lot of correlation with people who feel like creators shouldn't do that with people who want to be able to leave really harsh and mean comments because they want their comments to stay up. They want the creator to feel forced to leave their comment up and have to deal with the emotional side effects of that because they're trying to emotionally harm the creator. I don't think that's the case. I think you're allowed to remove comments. It's up to you. And if people don't want to follow you because you do that, then they can go follow somebody else. At the same time, this thing goes in depth about how all of the feedback that they're getting on Patreon on the revised chapter and everything else that they're posting, the world building and whatever, is unasked for critique. Now, I went on this rant in my How to Take Critique Better video, but I will go on it again here because I think it's relevant, just a smaller version. If you are making money off of your art, then any feedback on that art is solicited. It's inherently solicited. And I think it's so ironic to me that they paywalled the content and then they said, but you can't critique what we're posting, because they're even taking it one step further where they're asking people for their money. And so now it's not just that people are getting these writing updates, but they're actively paying for the writing updates. And then they're being told, but you don't actually get to have an opinion on what you're reading. And if you share your opinion too strongly with us, then we'll ban you. And I don't even think it's that like morally messed up per se. Like, I don't think they're necessarily hurting anybody with this except themselves. Because if you don't want that feedback, then don't post the updates to Patreon. Don't open the curtain so much on your writing process because you can't control other people. And as much as we would love to just say, hey, I want to put this thing out on the internet and I don't want any of you to tell me anything about how you feel about it, wouldn't we all love to do that? But none of us get to do that. If this is really what they want, then they should not be posting these updates on Patreon. And that's not to say they aren't still within their right to try and curate that space on Patreon. I just think they're not going to be successful. I think there's always going to be people who come in and have critiques and have thoughts, and they're going to have to keep blocking people and keep banning people, and they're just going to get more and more and more frustrated because they're not setting themselves up to have the creative environment that they seem to want to have. If she wants to write in a bubble, then she needs to be in a bubble. If she's not in a bubble, and if she's putting what she's writing writing out into the world, then she's going to get feedback on that writing. You do not get to charge people money to consume your art and then tell them they don't get to have an opinion on the product they received. You paywalled it. You paywalled these writing updates, which means that you're asking people for their money to access it. And then you turned around and said they don't get to have an opinion on it. So I don't think this is a method to success and a route to provide the creative space they seem to want to have. But I wouldn't really have a problem with it per se if it wasn't for the fact that they paywalled those writing updates. I have no idea if there's going to be a differentiation there, where if someone can say like, hey, you're not giving us writing updates that often, I'm kind of upset about that. Is that something that they would consider to be ban worthy? Are they disincentivizing people from commenting stuff like that by threatening bans for people who critique? I'm just going to try and summarize all of the scattered points I made really quickly. While I understand that it's well within a creator's right to curate the experience that they have with their audience, I don't think she's setting herself up to have the experience that she wants to have by doing this, because I think she's going to get that feedback anyway, and she's just going to continue to be frustrated, and it's not going to be a very good writing environment for her, and that the only way for her to actually stop getting that critique is to stop posting the writing. But they paywalled it, and so now that it's paywalled, I do think that people are within their right to critique the experience that they're having subscribed to the Patreon. And so if they're not allowed to do that, I don't really think it's right for them to say people can't do that. And I have this final, I'm not sure about whether or not you as a creator have a right to shy away from, delete, or block criticism of you as your person. I think it depends on what that critique is. And I can understand why, when there's a big wave of criticism for a creator and they're deleting the comments, why people get frustrated, because it looks like they're trying to hide that. And that might have been part of where this came from because of something else that Audra did, which we can finally get to. For you, immediately. For me, tomorrow, because it's quite late in the evening. I'm about to change outfits. Now, we just finished going over everything going on with her Patreon, and now I want to talk about Goodreads. In my first video, she was sitting around 1.7, 1.8 stars, but the Goodreads at that point in time had been frozen, so you couldn't leave new reviews. Audra said she had no idea why this was, and a lot of people believed her at the time. I specifically thought that it was possible that because she had gotten so many 1-star reviews so quickly, the book had been flagged for potential review bombing, and that Goodreads had frozen it as a result to review the reviews. Over time, reviews have been removed from Goodreads. Interestingly enough, not exclusively 1-star reviews were being removed. I noted a 5-star review that I remembered from when I was looking at the Goodreads in depth, where somebody had said if Yaros had wrote it, it would be a 5-star, so I'm giving it a 5-star. And I felt like that made it obvious that that individual hadn't maybe read the book, and that potentially Goodreads had felt the same way, and what they were doing was going through and removing all the reviews that they felt were potentially left by people who had not actually read the book. But obviously more 1-star reviews were removed than any others because her star rating had gone up, and by the time I made my second video, I think she was sitting around a 2.1. So I was periodically checking the Goodreads to see if reviews were being added, if they were being removed, and what the star rating was. And at one point, I clocked something really interesting. And that's that she had updated the byline on Goodreads. Now, the byline is the term used for where who the book is by is listed. So, for example, I have Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. I have Twilight by Stephanie Meyer behind me. So by Stephanie Meyer is the byline. The reason why that's important is because on something like a graphic novel, the byline has two names. It's based on the work by Stephanie Meyer, but the art and adaptation is by Young Kim. And so if you have a book by multiple authors or something like a graphic novel where the art is by one person and the story is by another, then there might be 2 or even 3 names on that byline. Audra had updated hers to include her editors. I personally, in all of my years of being a fan of books, have never, ever seen editors listed on a byline anywhere. That was when this went from, oh, no way, she's trying to blame the editors now, to what? Because it's one thing to point people at nameless editors, but this, like having their names listed fully on the Goodreads, after having said in her TikTok reintroduction that if you want to see what happened, go look at the editor notes I have on Patreon, and then having those editor notes on Patreon that certainly look like she's trying to paint it like the editors didn't give her that much feedback. It's one thing for her to be doing that in abstract and have it just say developmental editor, copy editor. It's another thing for her to be so openly showing these individuals' names. I've obviously redacted them for the purpose of this video, and thankfully, due to intense backlash about this from everybody, a few days later, she did replace the byline, and now she has her illustrator and somebody else listed, I'm pretty sure. You'll just have to take my word for it. Under these redactions are the full names of these editors, who are both contract editors that you can just hire to work for you to edit your book if you want. When it was in the abstract, it certainly bothered me. I'm not going to lie and say it didn't bother me, because I certainly didn't think it was true. But I also didn't care nearly as much as I started to care when I realized that it's not just that she's trying to deflect the blame off of her, but she is actively trying to point the blame at other people. The same thing that she did to T.L. Lewis. She's trying to say, no, it's not my fault. It's their fault. Go bother them. And actually putting their names out there for people to bother. Now, I probably should protect myself a little bit here and clarify that we don't know that that was her intention with this behavior. I am interpreting her behavior and telling you what I think her intention was. Another thing that I'll point out is that the reviews have been opened back up, so you can now leave a review of this book, or you could in the past few weeks. I don't know if they're going to block it again, but it's down to a 1.5, and there are a lot of comments from people who are saying that they got an email from Goodreads saying that their comment had been removed, but that it hadn't actually violated any community guidelines, and so they could go basically relieve their comment if they wanted to. And a lot of people were really annoyed by that, because it's like, well, why did you remove the comment if it didn't actually violate the guidelines? Again, going back to what I said about Audra and her fibs and her twists in the narrative and how this calls into question the credibility of anything she says, she said, I don't know why Goodreads is blocking new reviews. I'm working with them on it. That's what she said. Is this a spin on the reality? I don't know for sure. I'm just speculating here. But per my research, a lot of the advice out there for authors who feel like they're being review bombed is to flag specific reviews, because apparently you can go to a review and you can click the 3 dots or whatever, and you can flag it for having violated Goodreads terms of service. Now, Goodreads is very clear that just leaving a negative review does not constitute violating the terms of service. However, if somebody is making multiple accounts to leave multiple reviews on the same books, that's not allowed. Each individual is allowed 1 account to review books. Makes sense. As well as anything hateful, bigoted, anything like that. And anything that is a direct insult towards the author themselves as opposed to a critique of the book. So if I leave a review saying 1 stars, hated this book, it was terrible, worst read of my life, that doesn't violate community guidelines. But if I tack a sentence onto the end of it saying, this author is a fucking idiot and I hope they never publish a book ever again, then that might violate the community guidelines, because now I'm attacking the author, not the book. That's my understanding reading their content policy. And again, all of the advice that I saw towards authors who had stories about potentially getting review bombed, both from Goodreads and from other authors, was to flag the individual reviews as being against community guidelines, and Goodreads tries to respond to those flags within 72 hours. This is just speculation on my part. I started to wonder if maybe Audra was going through and flagging the reviews that she felt violated the guidelines, and we know that she's not always the best at interpreting the difference between constructive critique and bullying, and potentially was going through and flagging a lot of the negative reviews saying that they violated the content guidelines, and eventually that led to Goodreads freezing the reviews until they could figure out what was going on. In which case, I wonder if they just erred on the side of removing reviews. It just led me to wonder, when she said, I don't know why Goodreads froze the reviews, did she word it like that just to give her the benefit of the doubt? Is this a shift? Is this a fib? Is it an outright lie? Because she has shown us that she's willing to do that too. Because I don't really know why Goodreads would on their own stop reviews from coming in or remove them if it wasn't the author complaining about the reviews. Like, it seems to me from my research that Goodreads doesn't really monitor this stuff on their own. And so you have to alert Goodreads to it if you think it's happening, but that if you do, that they will look at it. So many of the reviews, like multiple 1-star reviews saying my review got removed, but then I got an email from Goodreads saying that it didn't actually violate community guidelines, so I could re-upload it if I wanted to. to, and people being like, first of all, why wouldn't you just put my review back up if that's true? But second, why did you remove it in the first place if it didn't actually violate the guidelines? I wonder if they were just erring on the side of caution and then actually went through the comments and realized that a lot of them were fine. I don't know. I'm just relaying the information to you. You decide what you want to believe with all of that. And then she posted the new editor Q&A. And if there was any doubt in anybody's mind that that was the angle she was taking, this Q&A squashed that. But once again, just to reiterate, that is still my opinion. We're going to go through this. Massive shout out to book lover Laura. She's also been covering the situation super in depth, and she saved my booty because, again, I'm not that good at saving receipts. So I had not actually screenshotted this entire Q&A. She did delete this Q&A. So I frantically DM'd Laura, like, you made a video about this. Do you have the screenshots? And she sent them to me. So shout out to book lover Laura. Definitely check her out. She's made a bunch of videos on this subject. But if you're a little tired of this subject, she's also made some great videos about this crazy thing going on with a book subscription box called Fabled & Co. That story is insane. And she's been very diligently covering it and has very many videos on it. So if you're looking for more fun book drama to take a look at, definitely check those videos out. I will link the first one in the description. So this Q&A was posted on August 25th, and the intention of it was to be a Q&A with the new editor. So it's the editor answering these questions, not Audra. Now, I will take the opportunity here to tell you that people have called into question the existence of this editor. I don't want to dive too deep into that for a few reasons. One, I don't want to encourage doxing in any way, shape, or form. If this editor is a real person and they do want to remain anonymous, which it seems that they do, then I think we should respect that. But not only that, I will tell you that because Audra has this team now, and there is a lot of evidence that illustrators on her team are real people that are not Audra. She is not making them up, and they are actual people that are working with her. I wonder how difficult it would be for Audra to invent a person and for them to believe that there is another person. And so I guess the question becomes, do we think that they would be okay faking having another editor, or is she lying to them? Have they never actually been on a call with this editor? Especially because her revision process said that they all were going to work together so closely and be on calls together. So while I do understand that people have pointed out that this editor doesn't really have an online presence at all, there was allegedly a Substack that had been created super recently. I was not able to find it, but I just want to reiterate that, like, I don't really think it matters. But safe to say that Audra Winter, the author and the originator of all of this, stands by what was posted in this Q&A, or she wouldn't have posted it. And I really think that's the important part. And so I just want to read this from the perspective of how did the answers to these questions play into this whole storyline and what this shows us about Audra's perspective and what she was trying to do at this point in time to shift the narrative. The first question is, why are you doing a Q&A? Audra should focus on writing the book. There's a divide between people who want answers and people who want Audra to step back from social media. Neither side is inherently right or wrong. There's no correct answer with handling this sort of viral situation. Everyone has a different opinion. However, there are several people who have read the book and have questions about the steps Audra and I are taking during revision. I feel like consumers who purchase the book deserve answers given their obvious disappointment. So this is why the editor is saying they're doing a Q&A, and potentially why Audra is doing these Q&As to begin with. I've said before in these videos that I think a lot of the reason why Audra isn't fully stepping away is because if she does step away and doesn't give a timeline for return, there are probably a lot of people who have pre-orders open right now who would want a refund. And she potentially doesn't have the funds to do that, or doesn't want to give those funds away. Question number 2 is, how does it feel knowing she prioritized hiring 8 to 10 artists before an editor when the criticism was entirely about her writing? After speaking with Audra and clarifying her goal for this project, it doesn't really bother me. She's taking a multimedia, interdisciplinary approach, which is unusual, but the art and the text are two separate elements. She had both developmental and copy editors in addition to several artists. Both editors were hired before any of the artists were brought on board, but the editing was not sufficient. The art has been largely put on hold while we focus on the text, since that is what the customers were concerned about. So this is where, I'll be honest, I know I went on a whole rant about how I do not think that we should try to figure out whether or not this editor is a real person. I, however, do have doubts that if she is working with an editor, that they actually wrote the answers to these questions. I do think it was Audra, or if it wasn't Audra, that she edited the questions or gave the editor talking points, because the whole multimedia interdisciplinary approach is buzzword terminology that Audra has been using to describe what she's doing. But not only that, there is she had both developmental and copy editors in addition to several artists, and then parentheses, both editors were hired before any of the artists were brought on board, end parentheses, comma, but the editing was not sufficient. Audra does this a lot in the text that she puts on screen, in other responses that she's done, and in other Q&As that she's done. This flags to me as something that she does when she writes stuff. I don't know whether or not this editor is a real person. I don't think we should put any effort into figuring that out, but I do believe that this Q&A was answered by Audra herself based off of some of these nuanced language things that really line up with how she types and talks. What steps is this editor taking to avoid the previous editor's mistake? Boy, howdy, here we go. If 2 former editors signed off on the previous edition and let it go to print despite its rough condition, what is this editor doing to make sure she doesn't make the same mistake? So even in the phrasing of the question, like, we are being led to believe that there are people in the audience who are saying, what is this editor doing to avoid previous editors' mistakes? I am not 100% certain that this is a question that the majority audience had, or if they did, it was probably more phrased as if she had editors before and the book was still in the condition that it's in, why does she think a new editor would fix that? Instead of her just working more on her writing skill. And she might be twisting that question into this one. I find it hard to believe that there were a mass number of people out there who thought that this ended up the editor's fault. But I will say that when this situation was first going down, there were people kind of asking the question of, is it her editor's fault? And there were a lot of professional editors coming forward on TikTok to say that your job as an editor is just to provide feedback. The author doesn't have to listen to you. But the answer to this one is, I have looked over the edits from both editors. While both editors' comments were correct, both the developmental and copy editor provided edits that were accepted into the manuscript. Neither of them were nearly as thorough as they needed to be. Developmental and copy editing aside, there should have been a line edit. These issues are obvious given readers and my own confusion while reading the book. We're starting with a thorough development pass. I've read the manuscript in full and provided both inline comments as well as thorough feedback on my thoughts on the manuscript. One of the major goals I have for this pass is establishing the world. In my first read through, I was shocked by how many elements of the world building were dropped in without explanation. That's something the previous developmental editor should have picked up on. Audra has spent a lot of time world building, but that world is not built up for the reader. Other issues will be tackling our characterization and character arcs, the sequence of events, in-world logic, and the various systems of this society, magical, governmental, religious, etc. It's not just the phrasing of the question, right? Now we have the editor allegedly answering this question, directly insulting the other editors and saying they did not give thorough enough edits. This is part of what also makes me suspicious that if there is a new editor, that they were the ones answering this Q&A. Listen, I know there are unprofessional people out there. I cannot imagine being in a situation where I am a contract editor and I'm brought in to work on a revision of a book and I'm okay with publicly trashing the other editors involved. And especially if she is working with someone that doesn't have much of a social presence, we don't know that they even know what Audra is posting on TikTok. And so openly say, neither of them were nearly as thorough as they needed to be. I was shocked by how many elements of the world building were dropped in without explanation. That's something the previous developmental editor should have picked up on. So these are two moments where there is a direct dig at the previous editors, where this new editor is claiming that these old editors didn't do what they were supposed to do. What fantasy books have you worked on in the past and which was your favorite? My current favorite is another project I'm working on right now, though Age of Scorpions takes precedent, so I can't discuss it in depth. It's a political fantasy novel inspired by Chinese folklore. So this is one of the answers that made people suspicious that this editor isn't a real person, because this question is, what books have you worked on in the past and which was your favorite? And they ignored the first part of the question and said that their favorite is another project they're working on right now, so they didn't have to give the name of another book that they'd worked on. But this is interesting to me because they put together this Q&A. So they put this question in here and they included this beginning of it that then isn't answered in the question itself. So this is so interesting to me because it is a very media trained answer, where the answer to the question shifts to answer the question that the answerer wants to answer. I hope that sentence made sense. But if they don't want to talk about what books this editor has worked on in the past, then they've kind of given this spin answer. But I think it's really interesting that they were the ones who posed this question to themselves in the first place in this Q&A. Because if you don't want to talk about what books you've worked on in the past, then why include that as part of the question? Why not just say, which is your favorite book that you've worked on? What happened with the other feedback from the other editors? Will they be considered in the second edition? Goodness me. Feedback from the editors was implemented. The developmental editor simply did not provide thorough enough developmental feedback. Okay. So again, a direct dig at the developmental editor. Then with copy editing, you have to strike a balance between making changes and preserving the author's voice. The copy editor leaned towards the latter. This is a glaring issue because the prose was not up to snuff. There were words used incorrectly, sentences that don't flow, repetition, etc. The book needed more thorough developmental edits and substantial line edit, and then copy edits. Audra was given the go-ahead when the book was obviously not ready. I will be working with the 1.0 edition of the book as the base, using the edits the previous editors implemented. The overarching plot will remain the same, a quest plot, but every chapter is being reworked to improve flow and logic of the narrative, sorry, that word was covered, and better emphasize the characters. The story is ultimately character-driven, but the characters were not developed enough in the first edition. So once again, throughout this answer, just taking direct digs at the other editors, and then saying they're going to be starting, it seems, from the version of the book that Audra sent to those first editors, and this new editor is saying they're going to be using their feedback to guide them, but that they're editing that first edition. And again, doubling down, tripling down, that they didn't give her good feedback or throw enough feedback or help her enough in the way that she needed, and that they signed off on the go-ahead on the book. Remember that. Has the editor ever dealt with such a hefty project like this before? What made her want to take this on, and what's her zodiac sign? I've worked with both beginners and experienced authors and have worked on much longer work, so I wouldn't even consider this particularly hefty. The situation was brought to my attention by another author I've worked with who thought I'd be a good fit. Sorry, again, it's covered, so I'm assuming that says a good fit, or there's a typo because it just says I'd be a good for this project. I'm a big fan of fantasy and science fiction. My favorite book series of all time is the Broken Earth trilogy. So this setting, a post-apocalyptic version of Earth that has developed magic in place of technology with a focus on ecology, is fascinating to me. I'd love to see more speculative fiction where the environment plays a large role in the story. Also, I am a Taurus. I don't really have that much to say about this, so we're gonna move forward. Do you plan on having beta readers? I have planned the editing process around both beta readers and ARCs. At some point, we'll be looking for a pool of beta readers that includes people who have read the original book, as they can provide feedback on specific improvements. After receiving beta feedback, we'll implement another round of edits. Once we're further along in the process, there will be more information plus a schedule so readers know what to expect. So they're just saying they are going to do beta readers and ARCs. What are your editor's credentials and portfolio of prior edited works? I was curious and read Caitlin's Substack article called From Amateur to Author. Would Caitlin categorize Age of Scorpius as similar to those amateurish romantasy books named, such as Powerless or Fourth Wing? So this is where we dive into this Substack that I was not able to find. I'm not sure if it was removed or not. I dug pretty deep for a Substack by somebody named Caitlin with a Y that had a story on it called From Amateur to Author, and I could not find anything. And it seems that whatever the story was took a dig at Powerless and Fourth Wing, which are both big romantasies on TikTok. Now, you guys know how I feel about Powerless. I literally just made a video about that last week. Fourth Wing, I liked a lot more. I could not find the article itself, so I could not actually read the article. But what we know here is it's called From Amateur to Author, and they said amateurish romantasy books named, such as Powerless or Fourth Wing. So we can assume that Caitlin was essentially calling those authors amateurs with this article, which I find surprising. But again, I couldn't find the article itself, so I don't know if that's actually what the article was. Given the virality and amount of private information being shared right now, I'm not comfortable discussing myself. I realize that sounds like a cop-out, but I'm a private person to begin with and actively avoid social media. I hadn't even heard of Age of Scorpius until a client brought it to my attention. I'm not here for recognition. I'm here to give disappointed readers the novel they were promised. As far as my credentials go, I have multiple writing degrees, including both a technical writing degree and a Master of Fine Arts in writing rather than just creative writing. An MFA is the terminal degree for writing, although some universities offer PhDs and is required to teach at a collegiate level. During my studies, I worked directly under multiple award-winning authors, was awarded a mentorship with a publishing professional, and did 2 theses. Is that the plural for thesis? theses. One work of fiction, one work of nonfiction. I've also worked at an independent publishing house. I'm currently in the process of applying for PhD programs, though the academic landscape is so tenuous right now that I don't expect anything to come of it. Oh my goodness. Age of Scorpius is a strange case. Audra has spent a lot of time building up the world where books like Powerless or Fourth Wing haven't. Audra has also spent a lot of time reading within the genre she is writing, and I would argue that Yaros, at least, has not. But coming up with an idea and fleshing out the world and then communicating that idea are two different skills. Understanding the elements of story and implementing them are two different skills. One of my goals in working with Audra on this manuscript is to bridge the gap between what she's trying to convey and what the reader is receiving. She's an expert in the world and understands the genre she's writing in, but needs work on distilling that all into a cohesive narrative. It doesn't matter how fleshed out a fantasy novel is if the reader doesn't understand it. It's sort of the inverse of Fourth Wing or Powerless in that regard. Readers who love those titles really connected with the characters and the voice, while critics pointed out the flaws in the world. With Age of Scorpius, readers are unable to connect with the characters and the voice due to the prose, and then because of developmental issues, the world building does not come through. Okay, that was really long. I'm going to split it in half to talk about it. First, her credentials. This is another thing that made people suspicious that this was a real person. I'm more just suspicious that the editor themselves actually filled this out, because the way this is written up is not just not really the way that people talk about their experience, but it mimics the way that Audra sometimes talks about her experience in a way that makes me suspicious. I do think it's written by somebody who is trying to pump up their experience. Typically, if somebody asks you what your academic experience is with something, you just list your highest degree. On a genuine resume, it's something that would be listed out, right? Bachelor's in this subject, master's in this subject. But if you were just colloquially asking somebody, hey, what's your experience with this? And they have a master's, they would just say, I have a master's. So pumping it up to this degree, I have multiple writing degrees, including both a technical writing degree and a Master of Fine Arts in writing. What is a technical writing degree? What does that even mean?
You guys are never gonna believe this. I have a technical writing degree. Apparently, computer science counts. I started Googling around about this in editing to try to figure out what a technical writing degree was, and computer science and cybersecurity type degrees are often on the list. So just kidding, I guess it is a thing, and I guess I have one. Would you look at that?
And then to explain that an MFA is the terminal degree for writing, although some universities offer PhDs and is required to teach at a collegiate level. Yes, a master's in fine arts is usually considered to be the highest form of education that an artist can get. Some universities offer PhDs in performance studies and things like that, but typically the PhD associated with artistic stuff is not in the making of the art itself, but the study of it. I don't know if that's going to make sense. For example, my college professor that worked in dance had an MFA in dance, but he was getting a PhD, but it was in performance studies, and his PhD was focused around analyzing and interpreting and studying performance, not on actually running performances. I just think this is a weird way to talk about this. Just having a degree in it isn't necessarily viewed as a certification that that person actually can write a good book. And so again, to harp this much on the degree is interesting to me, because for most people in the writing industry, that would matter, but as a piece of the whole. It just doesn't feel to me like something that somebody who actually has this much experience would write. It feels like something that someone would write if they were trying to make it look like they had a ton of experience. If somebody actually had experience and was confident with it, I feel like they would just say, I have an MFA in writing, and then move on to their other experience. And also, like, I'm currently in the process of applying for PhD programs, though the academic landscape is so tenuous right now that I don't expect anything to come of it. I just think it's a strange thing to include in your experience. Like, that's not experience that you have. That's experience that you're trying to gain. I just don't even know why you would mention it. But then we get to the next slide, where there's direct call out of Powerless and Fourth Wing and digs at them and insults to them. She essentially says that Audra has the opposite problem that Powerless and Fourth Wing have, which according to her, Powerless and Fourth Wing aren't super built out worlds, but the stories are really engaging and they attach people to the characters, and that's why people love them. Whereas Audra has this really fleshed out world and this really thought out world, but she's struggling to get the reader to connect to it through the characters. I don't necessarily think that that analysis of Audra's work is incorrect. I stressed in my first video where I talked in depth about the book itself that I am genuinely unaware of whether or not the world building could work. I know that it didn't work in the way it was presented, but I don't know if presented in a different manner, in a manner that was less confusing, if the world building itself is sound, or if that in and of itself needs work. Again, if we look at this from the potential of was this written by Audra or not, we know that the world building aspect of her story is the part that she is so attached to. We know that she absolutely adores this world, and it seems that that is the part that she's passionate about, seemingly more so than the writing itself. And so, with everybody questioning whether or not this world could work for a story, I feel like that's one of the things that bothers her the most. But a lot of people were really taken aback by this Q&A, A, because of the blaming of the old editors, and B, because of calling out like Powerless and Fourth Wing. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm a staunch defender of Powerless. I just made a video about it copying the Red Queen. But I do think it's just a very strange move, both for an author trying to rebuild trust with their audience and for a contract editor to point the finger at two major romantasy series and tear them down and say, well, those things have these problems and our book basically has the opposite problem. Why did they need to do this? There's no reason, like if they wanted to get across that they thought the problem was with the presentation of the world building and not the world building itself, they easily could have done that without taking digs at Powerless and Fourth Wing. And a lot of haters of romantasy have been defending Audra in a weird roundabout way by saying that romantasy isn't a genre known for its writing, so why are people so surprised that this book didn't have the best writing in it? That Audra maybe is latching onto that narrative and is trying to point out flaws in other major popular romantasies that her book doesn't have. You guys know I've tried to be as fair to Audra as possible through all of these videos. I'm going to take a 2-second moment to say something kind of harsh. Those books were readable though. I've read both Fourth Wing and Powerless, and I finished them. I could not finish The Age of Scorpius. I'm not saying that Fourth Wing or Powerless are changing the face of literature, or even that either of them are particularly well written, but they were readable and they were followable. And those are both things that Audra's book did not have. I do think that the reason why they're calling out these books is to try and, again, deflect and to say, well, everybody's saying the writing here is bad, but what about these other books that get feedback on their writing? Are you getting any sensitivity readers for diverse characters like Kaya? Secondly, will you be changing anything about Avia or Avia's story? I don't know exactly how you're supposed to say that character's name, place in the story. We will definitely be getting sensitivity readers, not just for Kaya, but for multiple characters. Avia will receive some changes as I am not satisfied with her place in the story and subsequent lack of arc. One of the goals I have for our developmental edits is fleshing out the characters and their arcs. So this is just responding to some of the criticism that people had about the book itself. I don't know that I got to the character Kaya, so I can't really speak to what people might have clocked from a sensitivity perspective with Kaya. Avia is the main character's sister, and a lot of people felt like there were a lot of scenes where Avia, the character, was being just trashed on by a bunch of the side characters and that the main character didn't stick up for her. And a lot of people felt like it was an unrealistic representation of sister dynamics because while certainly sisters argue, if there's love between the sisters, which we are led to believe there is love between these sisters, then if somebody else insults your sister, then it's like, whoa, hang on a minute. I'm the only person who's allowed to talk to them that way. You can't do that. And so a lot of people felt like that was something that was unrealistic. And in a lot of the reviews, this is something that has been called out. So this is the last slide. Why only one editor rather than 3? I specialize in developmental and line editing. They're my bread and butter, and they're the most important steps for this draft. My approach to developmental editing actually encompasses an important step of copy editing, consistency and logic. Copy editing isn't just spelling and grammar and punctuation, it's looking for continuity errors, ensuring all the details are consistent, that the timeline makes sense. These are all steps I take while doing developmental edits because I'm the kind of reader that gets pulled out of the story if something is illogical, anachronistic, etc. I'm qualified to do all 3 kinds of editing, but tend to avoid copy editing like the plague. It's tedious. I normally work with a certified copy editor who does not do development or line editing because of this. That said, this time there will be beta readers, ARC copies, and proofreaders involved with the process. We will be pulling in a certified copy editor once reader feedback has been implemented. So this editor is essentially saying, I'm not really going to be the copy editor. I'm going to do developmental and line edits. There will be an element of copy to that, which I think is true for really any developmental editor. I think if somebody noticed an inconsistency in the story, that they would provide that in their feedback probably, but they're not specialized in doing that, whereas a copy editor is. So they're basically saying, if I notice it, I will tell Audra, but we are going to bring in a certified copy editor once we get through the beta readers, the ARC readers, and the proofreaders, which I think is really interesting because ARC stands for Advanced Reader Copy. And I've never been sent one, although that is potentially changing. Thank you guys so much for subscribing. I cannot express enough how much I appreciate it. And it's very, very cool that I get to do these things, but ARC stands for Advanced Reader's Copy, and they are copies of the book that are sent to people to read and provide reviews before the book comes out. Now, I'm not saying that it's unheard of for ARC readers to get their hands on a version of the book that isn't quite finished editing, but usually it's that proofread kind of step. But it's my understanding that typically you're through the copy edit process by that point, and you might be doing some final proofing before the ARCs have been sent out. ARC reviews are intended to be reviews for readers so that when you look up the book and decide whether or not you want to pre-order it, there are reviews for you to read and judge whether or not that's a book you want to order, and also potentially for those quotes to make it onto the book. That's the intention of ARCs. It's not really meant to be a step in the revision process as much as it's a step in the release process, but that's just per my understanding. I've never published a book, and at this point in time, I've never been sent an ARC. So I think it's really interesting that they're saying they're going to send out the ARCs before they do the copy editing, because I do not think that that is typical. But those of you who are in the publishing industry, sound off. Let me know if I'm wrong about that. I will pin your comment. That's all we have for the Q&A. So at this point in time, many people, myself included, were very frustrated with this turn of events. When this Q&A was posted, she had already pulled the editors' names from the Goodreads. That is really what she's gotten the most backlash for, but people weren't thrilled with the digs at the other editors in this Q&A, and I was not the only one who felt like she was really trying to blame the editors for the state of her book. In fact, if you go on Goodreads now, you will find 1-star reviews where people are talking about how they don't like that she's pointing the finger at the editors. So this was the majority of feedback that she was getting, and there reached a point where I started to wonder, what do the editors think? What do they think? How do they feel about all of this? Are they receiving any real life impact from this? Are people contacting them? So I decided to do some real journalism, and I reached out to them for comment. Do not do this. Do as I say, not as I do. I did this with the intention of doing thorough journalism for the video. If you reach out to them now, it will just be bothering them. There is no reason to do it. Leave them alone. But they did both get back to me, and I tried my best to keep it unbiased, and I essentially just asked, are you the editor that worked with Audra? What their experience was like working with her, and then whether or not they've gotten comments or DMs from people referencing this situation in any way. Who Audra has been referring to as the developmental editor was very clear that she did not feel like what she did classifies as a developmental edit. She said she read the book once via Readsy. She said, this is not book development, it's one shot of editorial feedback. I never saw the book again. So according to her, she didn't really do a developmental edit. She did a one-shot editorial edit of the book. She also stressed in her answer to this question that she was very clear that the book was hard to follow and not ready for the world. I did not preempt that in my question, so I presume that that is a response to the Q&A from the new editor, where the new editor said that the old editor signed off and said the book was ready for print when it clearly wasn't. So according to her, she did not developmentally edit the book. She did a one-shot of editorial feedback, and she was very clear that she did not think the book was ready for publishing. She said that her and Audra had a very short working relationship, but that Audra was very kind, thanked her for the wonderful feedback, which she found immensely helpful. I'm not in control of what an author decides to do with that feedback. So I had mused at one point in my second video about how we've seen her respond to criticism in the public eye and whether or not that told us something about how she responded to criticism from the editors. This editor said she was perfectly nice. Then, and this is the best part of this for me, and this made me very happy to read, and when we get to the other editor's response, they said something very similar. This editor said that I was the only person who's reached out to them about this. I think that's a lesson in the fact that TikTok isn't real life. And I spent a while thinking about this because T.L. Lewis got so much backlash when she pointed a wave of hate at him. So how have the editors escaped that? And that's why I'm saying don't reach out to them. Like, we don't want to make that the case, right? I was very happy to see that they haven't had any real world impact from this, and that was my main concern. That was the thing I was worried about. I was worried that they were getting backlash the way that T.L. Lewis got backlash. And I think that there's a few factors at play here. The first is that T.L. Lewis is also on TikTok, and neither of these editors are. And so when people see the problem on TikTok, they can look up the person on TikTok and go and point hate at them. But I think the other thing is that Audra has really fallen out of favor. At the time that she was really pointing the finger at T.L. Lewis, I think she still had quite a large fan base of people who were rooting for her. About a month after that with T.L. Lewis, where so much more has come out about the situation and so much more has happened, and I think there's way less people who are on her side now, and so there's probably less people who are willing to campaign on her behalf. And the third thing is just that potentially, and this is something I don't say about people on the internet that often, and especially not people on TikTok, but there also could have just been discernment in the people themselves. I'm getting a wave of backlash and hate because this person talked shit about me online makes a lot more sense than my book was shitty because of the editors. Any number of those reasons or a combination of all of them might be why this is the case. But I just want to stress here at the end, I was very happy to hear that they aren't getting any backlash and this isn't impacting their careers at all. But the last thing I will say that this editor said, that her new editor obviously doesn't realize that I wasn't doing any development with Audra, just one assessment, and that assessment was long and detailed. To state that it wasn't thorough enough is laughable. It's 6 pages long plus a detailed markup. It simply wasn't implemented thoroughly enough. Just because they did accuse that the feedback wasn't thorough, she provided, according to her, 6 pages of feedback plus a detailed markup and said it simply wasn't implemented thoroughly enough. That was the response from the developmental editor. And then we get to the response from the copy editor. She did not contradict the idea that she was the copy editor, so I think we can presume that she was. She did say that Audra is a young, passionate writer who has always been polite and friendly. So Audra was nice to her, the same that she was nice to the other editor when they worked together. For whether or not she'd gotten her own backlash, she said, in terms of my own work, I am fortunate to be in a long-established career with many happy, traditionally and indie published authors, and I've received no negative impact from this issue. But one thing that really stuck out to me in the copy editor's response, at one point in her email, she said, I hope that in today's difficult world climate that people offer grace to one another and that an industry such as the arts demonstrates this more than any other. And she finished it off with, I will continue to wish Audra and all other authors the utmost success, as it is a hard thing to bring such a private passion into the public domain. I just want to commend this copy editor for how gracious this response is, and I completely understand where she's coming from. The actual harm here for me isn't in the quality of the book. I feel like some people are going to be mad at me for saying that because people did spend their money on this book. But if the only harm done here is that people spent some of their money on a book that they didn't really like, then that is ultimately pretty minimal harm. And to me, the most severe thing that she's done was pointing that hate at T.L. Lewis. And that's why I was worried that the same thing was happening to the editors, and that's why I wanted to reach out to them. I thought that they deserved to have a voice and to have a platform to respond to this and to say what they wanted to say. And I think it really stuck out to me that both of them chose to say nice things about Audra despite what Audra is saying about them. And specifically that this copy editor stressed that she really wants people to have grace and compassion for Audra and that it's very difficult to take such a private passion public. I do agree with all of that. The only thing I think that differs, in my opinion, on it is that asterisk of her pointing the backlash at other people. I think that's the part that I feel very strongly about, that she was getting a lot of criticism and she wanted to deflect it off of herself, and she is doing that in the direction of other people, or had been up to this point. And to me, that's where I really felt like she was in the wrong. And I will admit to you guys that upon emailing both of these editors, I was very, very angry on their behalf because of all of this, and I think a lot of people felt that way. And I calmed down a lot when I heard that neither of them have had any real impact from this. That to me is the most important part, and as long as they are okay and they aren't being bothered by people and they're not getting a wave of backlash, then how Audra continues to respond is how she continues to respond. And the relationship that she has with her audience is her relationship with her audience. And I've said multiple times in this video that there's not necessarily morality attached to everything everything else that I've covered in this video besides attacking the editors and I guess attacking those other books as well, that if she wants to paywall her content and different things like that, it really is at this point just about the relationship she has with her audience and whether or not she's setting herself up for success. And I just want to go back to something I said at the beginning of the video, that at the end of the day, it is just a book. And as I've mentioned, this situation has now breached containment, and there are people talking about it who don't usually talk about books and book drama. I even saw it on Mini Scroll. I love Mini Scroll, but that's how I know that it reached like crazy levels of attention, is that it ended up on Mini Scroll. They cover massive internet drama happening, and the fact that it ended up something that they talked about on Mini Scroll, I thought was fascinating, because that shows how far it breached containment. I think this isn't just a book talk thing anymore. This is everywhere. And I don't at all want anything I'm about to say to get misconstrued. I think this situation is nuanced, as most situations are, where Audra is in this situation due to her own behavior. And some of that behavior involves trying to point hate at other people in a way that I don't approve of. But we have to take a step back and look at actual harm done and whether or not the response sometimes matches the harm done. And I already talked in this video about how part of why I think this situation has reached the heights that it has is because it is quite a salacious story with a lot of plot twists. And I won't negate the impact of the fact that most of us know an Audra in real life. Most of us have encountered somebody like her who struggles to take accountability and tries to lie or give excuses to get themselves out of things. And I think that there is a joy in being able to trap somebody in those fibs, because when this happens in real life, we don't always have the receipts to back up. No, you didn't say that before. I know you didn't say that before. And so sometimes it can be hard to prove that somebody lied. And if they're adamant that that's not what they said or that's not what they meant by the statement that they made, then it can sometimes be hard to really hold them to accountability. And the problem with what's happening with Audra is that everything is documented and everything's online. So it's not even just that she's trying to delete the proof, that she's shifting the narrative, but the proof is still up on her page a lot of the time. And so I think a lot of people are finding a joy in calling that out because they maybe know somebody like Audra in real life that they don't have as much success doing that with, because there isn't so much proof of this behavior, of this trying to escape accountability. And the third thing I want to say just on why I think this has become such a big deal is what I said at the beginning of the video. While this is a story with a lot of plot twists and a lot of twists and turns and is quite dramatic, the real harm done is pretty minimal. And as a result, we can all kiki about it without getting that like, feeling in our stomach, you know? And in the chaos of the world happening right now, I think there is something to there being this, I keep using the word salacious, but this salacious situation going on, this big drama where you can look at the harm done and not feel terrible about the state of the world. And are we taking it too far? Have we reached a stage where the response and the amount of people talking about her doesn't match what she did or the harm done? And sometimes you have to look at your own role in that, right? I made a video that has quite a few views on this subject, where I was critical of her. And a creator named Jolie Black, who is an autistic woman, made an incredible video that I highly recommend you guys go watch, where she broke down how she thinks Audra's autism has played into her response, just to give some perspective for people as to why she maybe is behaving in this way. And two things that she kept harkening back to are black and white thinking and self-image, where autism ties to black and white thinking, right? Individuals with autism sometimes struggle to see nuance in situations. So in Audra's mind, potentially how she views herself and her own writing is that she is either a prodigy or she's just so fundamentally terrible at it that there's no hope for her. And she potentially can't view it as what I think it is, which is that she's just a young and green author who needs a little bit of experience. But also Jolie talked a lot about self-image. She used a different term for it, forgive me. She talked a lot about the truth that Audra holds within herself about the situation. And potentially some of what we've seen in the shifts in the public narrative are shifts in her own mind to help her cope with the scale at which she's made mistakes here. And instead of thinking of it as her own fault, like these deflections are potentially her internal reasons as to why this isn't her fault, instead of it being her trying to manipulate the public into viewing it that way. It just has this inadvertent effect of feeling like she's trying to manipulate the public into feeling that way. And I thought that was really interesting because I've often thought that specifically with the fibs, the lies, the shifts in the narrative, whatever you want to call them, that have existed throughout this situation, there isn't a lot of logic in it for me, specifically because there is so much proof to the contrary. So why does she think that continuing to lie is going to help her? And so when Jolie said that, I thought that was fascinating because that would explain that. Like if she is shifting how she is perceiving these situations to be the easiest for her to emotionally deal with, then she potentially isn't herself clocking that these details are shifting. Not to use the same example again, but like with the print on demand thing. Why is that something she would lie about? It doesn't make any sense because who's going to be mad at her for having done print on demand to begin with? If she has in her mind, as she potentially did when she was making that video, that part of the reason why the book turned out the way that it did is because she didn't pay enough attention to the edits, and part of the reason is maybe because she didn't get thorough enough edits, and if that's actually what she believes, then maybe believing that she wasn't doing print on demand at the time and was shipping all the books out herself as her own distributor aids in that narrative. It's such an interesting question. Does Audra actually believe these things she's saying at the time that she says them, or is she actively trying to mislead other people and she herself knows them not to be true? I don't say any of this to defend her. That's why I was saying I hope this doesn't get misconstrued. I don't approve of pretty much any of her behavior after this book was released, but I also am acknowledging that the harm done here is fairly minimal at the end of the day. And maybe it's important for all of us to remember that when we're talking about the situation and to approach it with a little bit of compassion for Audra, especially because I've kind of been hinting at this, I've kind of been building up to it, but I know exactly what date it was because I saw it on the date it happened and freaked out because I didn't have the screenshots. On Friday, September 5th, Audra wiped any evidence of her blaming the editors for the state of her book off the internet. It's been completely scrubbed. The comparison of the notes is not on Patreon anymore, and the Q&A with the new editor is not on TikTok. She has not taken down her reintroduction where she hints at what's on Patreon, but she didn't explicitly say in that video anything about the editors. I don't know why this is. None of us do. The same reason that we don't know why she took the editors out of the byline on Goodreads, because she did that before she deleted everything else. So it's entirely possible that she just saw all of the backlash, realized that people weren't on her side, and deleted everything as a result. It's also possible that one of the editors reached out to her. They were both so gracious in talking to me that I don't know that I necessarily believe that, but it is a possibility that in seeing how big this situation got, that they asked her to take that stuff down because according to them, there was stuff in there that wasn't true. But for whatever reason, there seems to be a very distinct shift in Audra and her approach to this situation online from September 5th onward. Prior to that, she was still posting the Q&As every week. She posted that TikTok reintroduction. She was posting very regularly on Patreon. She had posted the new revised chapter 1. They were also doing world building updates. After September 5th, she has really taken a step back. So noticeably so that there are people on her Patreon who are commenting on the fact that they're supposed to be getting world building updates every week. And the members of her team are posting with these reasons, these excuses why she's not posting to the Patreon right now. The first is that she was sick, and the second is that she's moving. I think she keeps trying to figure out what she can post to get people off her back instead of maybe just not posting for a while and letting people forget about her and letting this situation fall out of the online news cycle and potentially never return to the internet, or if she does, to do so once she has the book completed and is ready to republish it. But I have said that if she were to do that, I think it would be right for her to refund people. And there's a few things that people have noticed that are making people a little bit wary, a little bit nervous. The first is that people found a post representing her company on a venture capital site looking for VC funding for her business.
This is a posting from angelinvestor.us or something. It's a like Kickstarter-esque platform, but specifically for people looking for angel investors to invest a large amount of money, I assume. And this is a post from the World of Guardian.
This is fascinating to me because she is essentially looking for investors to help her pay the business bills right now, under the understanding that it's eventually going to become this major media franchise. So she is allegedly out there searching for VC funding right now. This essentially is what a publisher is. I know that we don't think of it as venture capital, but what a publisher is a business with a lot of free-floating cash and connections that can help make your book a success and then reaps some of the profits from it. So publishers are, in a way, a version of VC funding for authors. I know that sounds like a ridiculous statement, but I hope what I'm saying is coming across. She, per her own words, had a very bad experience with traditional publishing and wanted to turn away from it because she wanted control over her world. And so to then turn to venture capitalists and to try to get money from them has been fascinating, because if you thought a publisher was going to be controlling over what you're doing, she is not going to do well with venture capital feedback, because they are the most cutthroat of all. They would be critiquing not just the art, but the actual business side of things. And I can't imagine that very many of them would approve of some of the business decisions that she's made up to this point, because she spent a lot of the money that she made on the initial book run without really any proof that that investment is going to pay off. It just leads me to wonder if she's going to be successful getting this funding, and if getting the funding is going to be the best thing for her. I still stand by the fact that I think the best thing for her is just to step away, to walk away, to work on the book, to revise it. Then if she wants to go the trad publishing route, she can, and potentially get a book advance. Or if she wants to return back to self-publish, indie publish, she can also do that at that point in time. I still think that is the best path to success for her. I don't know that going after venture capital funding is the best thing for her at this point in time. But the other really interesting thing is, I've already talked about how she's moving. So on Patreon, a big reason as to why she hasn't really given a writing or a world building update in the past few weeks is because she is in the process of moving. And people have noticed a few Easter eggs about things that she said in talking about the move that have led people to the conclusion that she's moving to Finland. Now, I will tell you, I am skeptical of that. I think people are really piecing things together. And I'll also maintain that doxing her isn't okay. So do not try to figure out where she's actually moving to. Do not dig into that. I am exclusively looking at what Audra herself has posted and the interpretation of her words that other people are sharing, and why I'm skeptical. Here's why I'm suspicious that she's moving out of the country. In the post where she talked about moving, it wasn't actually her making the post, it was Elrose, one of her team members. And Elrose said, now certainly isn't the ideal time for Audra to be moving, but the political climate in the US is, not the best right now. And I would agree with that. I agree things are pretty scary right now in the United States, not gonna lie. And so I can understand why somebody might desire to move out of the States. In the same post, they said the bright side is that a big reset and renewed focus await. She'll be moving to be in close proximity to Solly, and they'll be able to work on the second edition together in person. We're all excited to see what new vigor this brings. And then for everyone, but especially those of you who are in the US, like Caitlin and I, look out for each other, find your people and hold them close. We keep us safe. Both the referring to the political and economic climate in the US and saying those of us who are in the US, like Caitlin and I, imply that Audra is moving out of the United States. So people started to try and dig into where they think Solly lives. On his Tumblr, he describes himself as a Finnish wraith. And so this, combined with Audra's team saying she's moving out of the US, lead a lot of people to speculate that she is moving to Finland. We don't know where Solly lives now. They could just be Finnish in heritage. That doesn't necessarily mean that they live in Finland at this point in time, but they could. And if Audra is moving out of the country and she is moving to be closer to Solly, then there is potential that she is moving to Finland. I can see where people got that conclusion. If Elrose and Caitlin believe Audra to be moving out of the country, and believe her to be moving to be close to Solly, and they know that Solly doesn't live in the US, then either Solly has to be on board with the lie, or these team members have to be okay with lying on Audra's behalf. However, I do think that jumping to the conclusion that she's moving to Finland is a little bit of a stretch given what we know. All we know is that Solly identifies as a Finnish wraith, which is a reference to a very dark time in Finnish history. So it's not just that they claim to be Finnish, but that the way that they claim to be Finnish does reference something from Finland's history. Some people lie online, right? But I think that that reference to Finnish history does support that they are potentially actually Finnish, but they also could just have been very in-depth about their lie. But I guess that's my first point. The first thing is, just because Solly is Finnish in heritage doesn't mean they live in Finland right now. We don't know where they live. It's entirely possible that Solly lives somewhere else now in Europe. It's also possible that Solly has immigrated to the United States. It's also entirely possible that Solly is of Finnish heritage but has never lived in Finland and isn't actually from Finland, the country, just has Finnish heritage. So I think there's just too many unknowns here for us to definitively prove that she is moving to Finland. But I dug into what it would take to immigrate to Finland just out of curiosity, because there's a lot of people online who are from Finland who are talking about how difficult it is to immigrate there if you don't have a country or a partner or a family member sponsoring you. I started to look into the policies. I'm no immigration lawyer. Take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. I was just reading their website. If she's trying to get an entrepreneurship resident approval sort of thing, then she would have had to list her business with them officially before actually applying for the residence. Her team has said that she's moving this week. So we can presume that wherever she's moving to, she has whatever paperwork that she needs to move there. And so if she is moving there under this entrepreneurship residency thing, then her business would have to be registered in their books already, and it isn't. I could not find any form of World of Guardian, Audra Winter LLC, World of Guardian LLC. I mean, I tried really hard. And out of curiosity, I tried looking up random other words to see if I just typed one word in, was the search good enough that it would give me options? And the answer is yes. So I don't know if she listed it under a completely different company name. That is a possibility. And it doesn't let you search by business owner, but I was not able to find any sort of business in the Finnish business, what would be the word, documentation list website that they have. I was not able to find this. And if she were moving there under that entrepreneurship residency visa sort of situation, then she would have had to have had her business registered with them already. There is a form of it that is, hey, if you want to move to Finland and then start a company here, there is a way to do that, but you do have to prove that you have enough income to do that or have enough free floating money to do that and still be able to live and pay your bills in Finland. But if you do that, then you don't have to have an already registered business. But then she would be lying on her immigration paperwork because she already does have a registered business in the United States that she's trying to move to Finland. She's not trying to start up a new business in Finland as far as we know. I don't really feel like she falls into any of the other resident application buckets. As far as we know, she doesn't have family there, but there could be stuff we don't know. Maybe she has family there and they were able to sponsor her move. I'm not sure. That is what makes me question whether or not she's moving to Finland, because how would she have gotten the resident approval status? And so I started to wonder if it was possible that she just is busy moving because her lease was up or something, but because she has a tendency to make excuses, she felt maybe like her lease being up and having to move at this point in time wasn't a good enough excuse for people and that she was going to get crucified for that. So she decided to make up this way bigger move. I'm not really sure. But again, that would mean that one or more of her team members are either lying on her behalf or she is lying to them. And I don't know how she would keep up a lie that she moved close to Solly. If Solly is a part of the team, like how would she lie to Solly about that? But again, we don't know where Solly lives. Solly could live anywhere in the world, and that could be where she's trying to immigrate to. We have no idea. But you might be wondering, Meredith, why does anybody care? Who cares where she lives? Well, the answer is because there are a lot of people saying that she's doing this in order to skip out on paying people back what they've already paid her for the pre-orders. I have seen some people talking about trying to get refunds and struggling to get refunds. I've seen other people talking about how they had to get mailed a check because the orders were fulfilled through TikTok Shop. And so she doesn't really have a way to refund people through TikTok Shop. My point from the jump with this situation about the refunds has been that a pre-order of a book is a pre-order of a book. If you didn't like the book, you don't get your money back. And I've seen some people say, well, but if she didn't actually provide a book, like if the product itself wasn't a finished book, then does it count? I think that treads into very dangerous waters, because who gets to decide what books were ready for publishing and what books weren't? If we set a precedent that it's okay to ask for a refund on a pre-order if you didn't feel that a book was at a quality ready for publishing, then anybody could claim that they didn't think the book was at that quality and get their money back. And a lot of times in these situations, people will say, but obviously in this situation, that was the case. But you can't just think about this situation and what your interpretation of it is. You have to think about some of these things from a broader lens. If we set a precedent that it's okay to ask for a refund on a pre-order just because you didn't like the quality of the book you received, then there's a lot of people who are going to read a book, not like it, and argue that it wasn't finished or wasn't ready for publishing as a result and try to get their money back. A pre-order of a book is a pre-order of a book. If you pre-ordered it, then you run the risk of getting the book and not liking it, and that's why you should do research before you pre-order books. Usually, if an author has never published before, there will be some kind of writing sample, and there are often ARC reviewers as well who have left reviews of the book already. Look at that stuff before you pre-order books, because it is strongly my opinion that as long as you receive a book, you are not owed a refund. However, there are, I believe, a few thousand pre-orders that have not been fulfilled. And that might account for the difference in the number of bookmarks that she said she's sent out at this point to the number of books printed. I talked about that a little bit when I was talking about it, where she said before I even received the books myself, I sent out 7,000 bubble mailers, but then she sent out 5,000 books. 2,000 is the number that I've heard of pre-orders that she hasn't shipped out, which is quite a bit of money for her that she would have to refund if she never ended up shipping those books out. And so there are people who are speculating that she is fleeing the country to avoid paying those people, and that she's going to skip out with this money and never return back to the internet and never publish another book. I'm still so torn on how I feel about that interpretation of this, because that would be so silly and probably wouldn't work. But given a lot of Audra's prior behavior, I wouldn't put it past her to think of something like that and to attempt it. I don't really think there would be any great path for retribution for the people who didn't get their books if she just decides never to send them out, because the orders have technically been fulfilled through TikTok Shop. People have gotten a bookmark. So from TikTok Shop's perspective, the order was fulfilled and you didn't complain about it at the time that you received the package. Now, I know that people can report things to the Better Business Bureau. People can complain about business practices and things like that. And I've already said I'm not a lawyer, so I don't understand these things at a deep level, but I don't really understand what method her readers would have for demanding that money from her, except a class action lawsuit. I think that would be the only way for them to demand their money back, and I don't know that there are enough people wronged by this who were charged enough money for this that it would end up being worth it in the end. And not only that, even if they did win that case, then most likely what would happen is she would just file for bankruptcy. And yeah, if she had money that she could use to pay those debts, the government would make her. But if she doesn't have the money, she doesn't have the money. And especially because it's an LLC, she can just file for bankruptcy, and that protects her from personal liability in those debts. But the court does frown upon you moving money you could use to pay your debtors out of your business and then filing for bankruptcy. If she did that, she would get caught. But that means that these readers would have to band together and do that class action lawsuit. And I don't know about you guys. I know everybody's in a different financial position, but I can't imagine that if I spent somewhere between $30 and $50 on a book and then didn't get it, while that is a ton of money for a book, and especially for a book you never received, I don't know that it's an amount of money I would pursue a class action lawsuit over. So the reason why I'm saying I don't think it would be a good idea for her to leave the country to escape her debts is because I honestly don't think she's ever going to be held to them. I don't know if people are going to love me saying that, but I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't really see a path in this in which she is actually held to these debts. So doing something as drastic as leaving the country just seems like an overreaction. I really think, unfortunately, that given the way our business laws are written in this country, she could very easily escape paying people back. But I'm not a lawyer, and I honestly don't understand what the Better Business Bureau's role in all of this would be. So if you're knowledgeable on that stuff, please let me know, because I am curious. But the other reason why I think it's far-fetched is because moving out of the country does not erase your debts. So even if she was trying to escape being held to her debts, there's nowhere in the world that she could go where the debts are just going to be wiped away. If she actually were going to be legally held to those debts, that legal holding to those debts would remain regardless of if she stays in the country or not. Now, if she is anticipating some kind of lawsuit and she's trying to avoid being summoned, leaving the country doesn't do that either. I can't imagine that she could avoid a summons by going to Finland. I think it would still reach her. For those reasons, I think it would be very silly for her to leave the country to try and avoid this. I will just go back to saying that just because I don't think there would be logic in that decision doesn't mean that isn't what she's trying to do. And there are people out there kind of worried that her presumably leaving the country is going to lead to it being much more difficult for people to get their refunds. I know that I finished out my last video saying exactly this, but because she has really taken a step back from the internet, I doubt that there is going to be big enough updates for me to make videos, at least for the time being. So it is very much my intention to move forward and not talk about this again until there is some kind of big update, or until she puts out the new book or something like that. That's where I'm at with this. This video was kind of all over the place. I hope that what I was saying about having some compassion makes sense, because again, I'm not trying to justify her behavior, and I'm not trying to say that she's acted right in all of this. I am just trying to say that we always need to keep in the forefront of our mind and our attention the harm caused by behavior. I do think it's fair to consider the attempted harm cause, and if she was attempting to deflect criticism directly towards the editors by name, then I do think that that is wrong, the same that I think it was wrong of her to try and deflect that criticism towards T.L. Lewis as well. And I am happy that for whatever reason she decided to take all of that down. And if you were to ask me, then I think she should just fully step away. I think she should cancel the Patreon, and I think she should refund people to the best of her ability, and then I think she should leave it be until she's ready with another book. Or I still stand by the fact that I think if she waited a little while, she could potentially pivot her TikTok and try to come back as more of a content creator and have content pay her bills until the book is ready. The internet is a very forgiving place. People have been forgiven for significantly more heinous crimes than this and have continued to have a platform. So I do think that it is still possible, as it is pretty much always possible, for somebody to return to the internet. And if she came back with a book that was of a similar quality, then obviously she would just kind of have the same thing happen all over again. So if there are any other small updates, I was updating on some of this stuff over the past few weeks on both Instagram and TikTok, so you can follow me on there if you want to keep an eye out for updates. That's going to be all for me today. Feels like a silly thing to say when I know this video is going to be so long. But that is going to be all for me today, you guys. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!